On this episode of the DTVC podcast, Scott Murphy from All 90s Action All the Time and Bloody Sam is back on, and we are looking at urban justice. So we are continuing our romp through Steven Seagal's DTV oeuvre with urban justice. So a fun one there. The very first, first 10 minutes or so, we talk a little bit about the World Cup coming up, just because the first time Scott was on was the last World Cup, the one in 2022. Now, that time, I think we did like a 40-minute opening on the World Cup that just sort of happened there. This one, it feels like it might go in that direction, but it's only about 10 minutes. We do have our share of tangents, and also stay tuned at the very end because we have a tangent for a possible new podcast idea. So I'm curious to see what people think if we ever did move forward with that podcast idea, what people would think. So stay tuned for that at the very end of the episode. And then next week, Freddie Young from Full Moon Reviews is back on, and we're going to be looking at the Minion Dolph Lundgren classic. I have that number 5 on my Dolph Lundgren list. If you haven't checked out my Dolph Lundgren list, it is on Letterboxd. And yeah, that is my number 5 Dolph movie of all time. So we're going to be talking about that one next week. Also, going to kind of get Freddie's take on the first half of the year, roughly first half of the year where we're at right now, as far as how the movie theater's been going with all the blockbusters. So we're not quite into that point where all the blockbusters, I think, late June into July, we'll see some more, but at least, get a sense of where we're at so far. So that'll be next week. So keep an eye out for that as well. Yeah, and then DTVC Extra, I probably do need to do an episode in the near future there for that, so keep an eye out. I was sort of pairing those episodes with the Ty episode, but again, because the mishap there, where I accidentally deleted the episode that he and I recorded, his episode's going to come later this month, but I may still pair it with that. And still deciding if I'm going to do The Mandalorian or Mortal Kombat. Probably Mortal Kombat for this one, just because those movies are a little fresher in my mind. So keep an eye out for that as well. Yeah, and then in terms of the site, yes, you may have noticed that the post for this past weekend was a day late. I don't know if it was $1 short because it's all free, but it definitely was a day late. We did look at the big fall for our PM post for this month. You may remember that one. You may not have seen that one or even heard of that one. But C. Thomas Howell's in it. Has an interesting cast. It's got Sam Sater, who you may know from The Majority Report. Kathy Griffin has a small part in it. Jeff Kober, all kinds of fun people in that one. So yeah, it was an interesting one to review. I think out of the 3 Howell movies, Howell PM movies, it was probably third after The Big Fall and not The Big Fall, Pure Danger, and of course The Sweeper's an all-time PM classic, right? That's like my 1 or 2 all-time PM movie. So this doesn't quite touch those, but that was our review for this past weekend. I'm going to hope to be on time this weekend. Planning to look at The Driver. I believe it's called The Driver. It's got a few names, but Mark Dacascos movie that he did with Wick Chaos. I don't know if I can pronounce his full last name, but where he's like he's a driver, and I think there's zombies in it. So we need to get some Mark Dacascos in. I meant to get Mark Dacascos in last month, and I fell behind on that. So we'll kind of make that happen. Just full disclosure, kind of why I've been behind on things the past couple weeks. So I had originally planned out that I would be going to see a Yankees game on June 2nd and then go with my friends this past Sunday to Coney Island to see Portland, Maine Hearts of Pine, the soccer team there, play a cup game against Brooklyn FC. So I had those things planned for a while, and then with the World Cup coming, I realized if I was going to go up to New England to visit my family, I'd have to do it now, just because the tickets were so expensive going to the World Cup. And so I just kind of shoehorned that trip in the weekend before, and so that's what's caused me to be behind on the podcast last week and this past week on the post. But hopefully we're going to get caught up there. No more delays, but we'll see what happens there. I'm going to do my best, though, to keep up with that. And then in terms of stuff that'll come after Driver, I'm not sure. Again, we're going to look at some other things. I want to try to do High Voltage just because that's an Isaac Florentine movie that I've been meaning to review. So, we'll maybe get that one in as well. But, you can always keep an eye out on the upcoming reviews watched Letterboxd list. That gives you a rough idea of what's coming. Sometimes I'll watch something and kind of add it to the top of the list, but that'll give you an idea of some of the things that'll be coming there. So keep an eye on that as well. Yes, and then I have been on some other podcasts. In particular, the PM Entertainment podcast I was on for a really great episode I did with John and I guess it's Mo Von Hellevit, I think is how he says it now. He was Mo Porn when I was on his podcast on Drunk on VHS about 10, 15 years ago. But yeah, really fun time. We talked about Angels in the City. So you can check that out. You should be subscribed to the PM Entertainment podcast. Yeah, what a great conversation that was. So definitely check that out. I've been waiting for him to put that one out, and it just he doesn't really do much as far as editing for that one. He just kind of he let us go. We just kind of got after it, and it was the three of us just kind of going back and forth talking about the movie. So yeah, a really fun one there. So definitely check me out there on the PM Entertainment podcast. Also, that Mandalorian episode that I did for Lambcast, I think Richard may have re-uploaded that one. So again, you can check that one out. I believe it's episode 812 on the Lambcast, where I was a guest host to talk about the Mandalorian, and then we had Jeanette Ward from Mundane Adventures of a Fangirl, and Todd Liebenau from Forgotten Film Cast, who both people that we've had on this podcast as well. So that was a really fun conversation. So you can check that out too. And of course, I was on the Comeuppance podcast talking about Stallone with those guys. So that was a really fun one. I had some tech issues, but they were able to sort of finish off the episode for me there. So yeah, you can check that one out on theirs as well. I think that's everything. Of course, I would be remiss if I didn't finish this cold open without talking about my newest novel, Mark in Sales. You can pick that up on Amazon, Kindle Unlimited. Also, my author, the link to my author's site is in the podcast description. So if Mark in Sales isn't doing it for you, I've got a host of other books. I've got 5 other books that you can pick up, plus Bainbridge, my short action novel. If you haven't read Bainbridge yet, that is also available on Kindle Unlimited and in paperback. That one, if you're a fan of PM Entertainment movies, old canon action from the early 90s, that's really what Bainbridge is all about. You can check that one out as well. All right, why don't we have John Cross from Miscellaneous Plumbing Fixtures playing our theme song, and then when we come back, Scott Murphy from All 90s Action All the Time is on, and we're going to be looking at Urban Justice. All right, welcome back to the Direct Video Connoisseur podcast. As always, this is Matt here, and I am joined once again by Scott Murphy from All 90s Action All the Time and Bloody Sam, the Sam Peckinpah podcast. I almost said contest podcast. As we're talking more Steven Seagal. Welcome back, Scott.
Thank you very much for having me back, Matt. Yeah. This is we've done quite a few now. I think this is maybe like our 15th or something. It's
So,
something like that.
yes, 15th Seagal movie, 16th time overall. And
Yeah.
so, we were just talking about I should quickly point out too, because this is your first time doing Zoom on my podcast, so you don't get the sultry tones of the Jitsi woman saying,
No.
yeah, right, exactly. And I'm going to say it's
We'll
Jitsi,
miss her. We'll
right?
miss her.
We will miss her. We will miss her. Yes, yes, exactly. But yeah, not only is this your 16th time on, but we were talking about this ahead of time. With the World Cup coming soon here, the very first time you were on, we had a pretty good sized tangent talking about the 2022 World Cup, and I know you were like, "Is he going to keep all of that in the podcast?"
I think it was like 40 minutes of us talking about the World Cup, so I was surprised that you kept it in. I was delighted but surprised.
Right. Well, and the funny thing too is the episode didn't air or it didn't post it until after the World Cup was done. So,
That's
yeah,
true. That's true. So it was like a preview, but it came after this
right,
after the
exactly.
tournament.
Yes, at least this time, this episode will be. It will definitely be before the World Cup starts. 'Cause I think the World Cup starts like mid-June, and this will be just around that time.
Mid-June,
So,
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, I think it's mid-June it starts.
yeah.
That's true. And yeah, I mean, despite the fact that it's it looks not good in terms of like the atmosphere in the States and
Right.
the things going around and the ticket, the dynamic pricing, and the fact that they might be putting ice agents at the stadiums, and that looks pretty terrifying. But part of me is excited because listeners, your listeners might not have picked this up previously, but I am Scottish, and Scotland have qualified for the World Cup for the first time since 1998, so 28 years ago. So it'll be exciting to see. And also, fun fact, in 1998, our group at that World Cup was Brazil, Morocco, and Norway. And our group in this World Cup is Brazil, Morocco, and Haiti.
Oh, wow. That's close. Yeah, because Brazil, Haiti are playing a game here in Philadelphia. Um, and so the price on that one is, I want to say it's like 800 for just the get in the door price.
Jesus
So
Christ.
yeah, it's one of the things that I've been reading is because I had been looking for games because I told so full disclosure because Arsenal just won the Premier League and I became an Arsenal fan because of the World Cup being here in '94. Dennis Bergkamp played with the Netherlands team and they were in the New England area training. And so I was like, well, when the World Cup ended, I was like, oh, who does Dennis Bergkamp play for? I want to root for that team. And so that's how I became an Arsenal fan. Um, but I told myself, because I didn't get to see any games in '94, that I will definitely see a game when they come here. And now I'm not sure. But there's a lot of us here in Philadelphia. I've read this online that are eyeing the Curacao Cote d'Ivoire game because it right now it's like 250 for the get in the door price. But people think that's the bottom's going to fall out of that because as we get closer to the date, because one of the things they're finding is that hotels aren't being booked or Airbnbs, and so they think the prices are going to start to fall out on some of these really big ones. And so it seems like a lot of Philadelphians are going to go to root for Curacao or Cote d'Ivoire because that'll be the most affordable one for them to get in the door and see.
Oh, fair enough. Fair enough. And yeah, and it is impressive. I mean, like that. I mean, a good team to root for because like Curacao, one of the smallest nations ever to qualify for a World Cup.
Yeah.
So maybe the smallest nation. I don't know, like, but
Right.
so yeah, yeah. Pretty incredible.
Yeah, yeah. So, it's kind of interesting. We'll see, but to your point, like all the things that you were talking about, they are issues. And it's like the other thing too for me. So I'm going to visit my family the weekend after we're recording. So next weekend, because I need the trains essentially because Philadelphia, New York, it's like New Jersey, but New York and then Boston, they're all hosting games. And so the trains from like mid-June on through till like the end of July are exorbitant. They're like, it's like hundreds of dollars. So usually I can get round trip to Boston, Massachusetts for like $150. Now it's like $300-400. So I had to go visit my family. I had to like squeeze a trip in before because I just like there's no way I could go. I didn't think until like maybe August again. So that's so
Mm-hmm.
that's the other part of it is here and the funny thing is there's no games in DC. So a train south to DC. I'm going to see a baseball game in Baltimore. A train south is really cheap. It's the same price because they're not hosting any games. But yeah, it's just a whole big mess of stuff going on. And so, yeah, I guess we'll
Yeah,
see.
I heard about that too. They mentioned that on I listened to a podcast called Guardian Football Weekly, and they mentioned them kind of like doubling the train prices.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, because, as you know, in America, everybody drives. And so when it comes to football, American football, like even here in Philadelphia, you can take a subway to the football stadium, and very few stadiums allow you to take a subway to them. If they have a commuter train, that's a big deal. But like, subway access, that's like a big thing. But most of the time, even with the ones in Philadelphia, people drive to the games and they park and they tailgate and everything. And FIFA has said no driving to games. There's no parking at the establishments. So I guess the previous governor of New Jersey signed a deal with FIFA saying, sure, you can use our trains for the normal price and you can just load them up with people and take them to where the New York team plays, the Metal or East Rutherford, New Jersey. But the new governor looked at that and said, boy, that's not really a good deal for us. That's a lot of money that we don't have. And so she said, no, actually, no, it's going to cost you $100 to take that train. And so, yeah, which I think that train normally is like $10 or something like that. From like, New York, you can't get it straight from New York Penn. You got to like get another train. You got to stop. It's a whole mess. Greatest city in the world, and going to see professional, American football is a chore. To go. You'd think that they could at least have places in the city because I mean, obviously, like I know, obviously in England and Europe, all of the major stadia are all like near public transportation. They're near trains. There are a lot of them are kind of embedded in the fabric of the cities. And in America, yeah, we just don't do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so it's. I think one of the points I think for you being a Scotland fan, wanting to watch your team play in the World Cup, it's something I've heard about recently. This idea of not shopping hard or not shopping hard, and this idea of like for people that try to boycott Amazon, but then like maybe you need Amazon because maybe you've got mobility issues or it just there's products that are only and this idea that like it's really more about things being regulated. You don't it's not about us having to boycott everything we don't like that's not right for us. It's like you should be able to root for Scotland and still hate FIFA. It's like you should be
Yeah.
able to watch, right? So,
Yeah, no, no, yeah, like, yeah, and it is, it's a complex moral maze in terms of like, yeah, of course, I want to root for Scotland. I'm happy that they've made the World Cup for the first time, since I was like 13, and I'm now, I'm now 40, going on 41, so like,
right.
it's been a long time. It's so yeah, but no, yes, I mean, like most football fans, I despise FIFA, Gianni and all his Gianni actually might be even worse than Sepp Blatter, to be honest. Like, when Sepp Blatter got, like, when the FBI raided their offices, and that was supposed to be, we've rooted out the bad ones, and we're reforming, and Gianni came in as a reform candidate, and now he's like Trump's best buddy. He's like possibly even more corrupt than Sepp was. Like, it's just ridiculous. Just like, we should just burn FIFA to the ground and start something new. It's just this ridiculous.
Yeah, it's insane because in the United States we're used to like the NFL, for example, being this big like cartel, and you just sort of expect it because everybody loves NFL football, so they'll watch it. And I don't think Americans were ready for the scale because a lot of Americans watch like they'll watch the EPL and or they'll maybe watch Italian football or La Liga, but they just watch those games like on a they don't really kind of follow the sport on a deeper level like that. They just sort of okay, I've got my jersey on, or I'm gonna go to a pub at 10 a.m. on a Saturday and watch some games and then go do whatever for the rest of the day. But they don't fully like they're learning now like, oh wow, this is what FIFA is. Like this is I guess the
Mm,
2022 World Cup people got a better sense of it just because of everything that
yeah,
surrounded that one. But now that
yeah,
it's
yeah,
happening in America, people are learning like everybody's so excited for the World Cup and now everybody's just like, oh man, let's just get this thing out of here. It's like, yeah.
yeah. No, I can understand that sentiment.
Yeah.
Just yeah.
Yes, but all that to say, this is your 16th time on the podcast. The first time you were on was
Ah,
again as we're starting the World Cup
oh,
in 2022.
yeah.
But this will also be your 15th Steven Seagal movie.
That is
So
true. That's my 15th Steven Seagal. Yeah, it's 16. So I understand that, like, because you were talking about this on a
yeah,
previous podcast recently, with John Cross getting into the 20 club. I
right.
understand he must. I think you're preparing some sort of jacket. Is that correct? Yeah, we all get jackets when we hit 20,
Right.
the 20 club.
Right, exactly. It's right with the DTV connoisseur logo on the back. Yes, exactly, exactly. Yes, yeah. We because yeah, you're it's very close. Probably close this year.
Yeah,
Maybe four more times this year. It's possible with how early we are.
it's
But
possible. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, John had just reached it. It's interesting too because like for example, Ty, who I have on once a month, he's kind of it's like he's a guest but not a guest in a way because he's always on
Yeah,
because
such a
his monthly
regular
spot.
contributor. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Exactly.
yeah,
And when I first started the podcast, I had Jamie, my co-host. And so,
yeah.
so she obviously wasn't a guest. She was a co-host. But she was on, so yeah, so it's always got, it's interesting, like, like, so like, t would Ty get a jacket or would that mean like, he's, yeah, yeah, that's, I'll have to figure that out. Yeah. Yeah. The 20 club for the, the podcast. Yeah.
So I look forward. I look forward. Four more appearances, and I get my
Yes.
jacket. I look forward to
Well, and
it.
that's the question, I guess, because it's time for another wellness check, based on how many Segals we've been doing, because that would mean four more Seagal direct-to-video movies, and
Ooh.
I know this is the last of the Fauntleroys, but how are you going? How are you doing this far in on the Seagal?
Well, I think I'm doing all right at the moment because like we had a little break from it. We've not done one in a little bit,
Yeah,
and also like even though I can't recommend this necessarily as a good movie, but it's funny. I listen to another podcast called Junk Food Cinema, and they often have a phrase where they say it's not a good movie, but it's a great movie, and that kind of fits into this. Like I don't think it's necessarily a good movie. I still rated it like 2.5 on Letterboxd. Spoiler. Uh, but um, but it is a very fun one. So no, I enjoyed rewatching this, and so yeah, so it's reinvigorated me in this Seagal joint. I mean, I'm sure the next one will probably be something terrible, but like, but it's reinvigorated me, and yeah, no, I'm good. I'm good to go again.
Perfect. Yeah, I feel like with the Seagal movie, if you don't feel like you have to take a shower when it's over, you're probably in good shape. I don't know.
Yes, and I didn't, but also I do love a movie where when you go onto YouTube to rent it or whatever, the title you rent it as one title, Urban Justice, and then in the opening credits it comes up as another title, Renegade Justice. I always very much enjoy that.
Right. Well, and because the thing is, this is similar to a lot of Seagal movies in that it takes a good amount of time before he shows up in the movie. Um,
Yeah.
though interestingly enough, he's in this one more than probably any of the ones we've done so far, which, according to the IMDb
hmm
trivia,
hmm
led to a lot of consternation for the poor director, Donnie Fauntleroy. But that also adds to that feeling of like, am I watching the right movie? When you're like, okay, well, there's no Seagal here, because this has happened to me before where I've queued up something on like Amazon Prime or something like that I think is one thing, and it just happens to be that another movie has the same title, and I'm
hmm
like 10
hmm
minutes in, and I'm like, this isn't the movie, like where's Ice-T? He was supposed to be in this movie or something like that, and it's like,
Yeah.
so there's a little bit of that tinge of like, am I in? And then suddenly Seagal's name pops up on the screen. You're like, okay, I guess this is his.
This is the one. This is one. I guess it is. It is confusing when you rent something and it's got one title when you rent it, but when you actually start watching the movie, it's got another another title. And yeah, like the other movies to date, You Die and Mercenary for Justice. This has very boring, um, like the most basic white on black opening credits you could you can
Yeah.
get, so it doesn't fill you with hope to start with, but actually there is a bunch of fun stuff here, which I'm sure we'll talk about.
Yes. Well, it's interesting because this is another Sony release,
That's
and
true. That's true.
it's weird because like Sony, because it's a Sony release, there's copyright protection. That means like if I want to get screenshots, I have to use my old computer that predates the copyright protection, but I couldn't get any screens for this movie. Even on YouTube, they were blocked. Because again, that's a Sony thing. They've got these deals with them to block all that out. But it doesn't, it's got the Sony backing in terms of probably distribution and shipping it out to Blockbuster and everything. But from a production quality standpoint, this doesn't feel like it belongs to one of the big movie houses.
No, it doesn't. You can definitely tell. It's very much DTV. It's very much kind of like a few locations. Um, and like something that I know is like a kind of recurring trope in your podcast is about, talking about the different types of padding. And of course this has one of my favorite types of padding to pad out your film, which is just because it's like these kind of anonymous kind of set locations. Like we get a lot of establishing shot padding of just being like, you're in LA, like
Right, exactly. It's like, and this, I guess this predates Breaking Bad by a year. And
yeah.
I think Vince Gilligan, when he was making Breaking Bad, he wanted it to be shot in LA. And
hmm
then, and he wanted it set in LA and all of that. And then when he found out how expensive it was and they were moving production to Albuquerque, I think the original idea they had for him is do like this movie does, where it takes place in LA, but you shoot in Albuquerque, you shoot in New Mexico. And he said, well, why don't, if we're going to shoot in Albuquerque, why don't we just have it take place there? Which is a crazy concept because, I mean, yes, they wanted to kind of play into like the LA drug war kind of thing in this
Hmm.
film, and that's why they wanted it set in LA. But I don't know about you. Would you have felt like, boy, I don't know if this is believable if it's set in New Mexico, set in Albuquerque or something like that? Like, I don't know that it needed to be in LA.
No, I don't think it needs to be in LA either. Like I could imagine like there being drug gangs in Albuquerque as well. Like
Yeah.
I don't know much about Albuquerque, but I can imagine. Like you know, in any place really. But like so I think like it just I guess they want it to be there so they can make references to like Compton and all these kind of places that people like an international audience might be aware of through like you know like rap and stuff you know because like they're not because they're kind of like famous American neighborhoods to people outside America. You know I've heard the name Compton a lot, for example, and there is these particular LA or New York neighborhoods that like I would be able to be like, oh, I know what that is. Whereas, you know, in other cities, if they said a certain neighborhood that's maybe a rougher neighborhood, I might be like, I don't know what that is. So maybe that's went into the calculations of like the like a kind of international thing of like these are kind of well-known places.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I didn't think of that because that actually plays in perfectly because, again, mid to late 2000s, there still would have been enough of that vibe. And again, probably plays into Seagal having this new market that he had of him teaming up with hip hop stars.
Hmm.
That
Hmm.
yeah, that probably would have played into that more. That's a good point. So that explain, that makes more sense. That because it definitely there are parts of it you could just tell this is not LA. It's
Mm.
there's no palm trees. There's no the streets. LA has a very distinct look, I think.
Hmm.
And so there were moments where you're just like, this is definitely not LA. And so, but I can see too of like it doesn't matter really if it is LA or not. If they're sort of selling you a concept that the rest of the world can see. And I kind of forget sometimes these movies are supposed to have sort of an international appeal. That's really where the money is that, it's rentals here in the United States, but in Europe, if they can get, actually get these movies in the box office, it can get even more money.
Yeah, yeah, if they can sell them internationally, particularly in the kind of the European market and the Asian market, which is what they often target. So I think yeah, and like you say, this was still of the era that like we've previously had we've previously had obviously Exit Wounds and Half Past Dead, and even obviously on the DTV scale a couple of years
Right.
before this, Today You Die, which
Yeah.
also directed by Donny Fauntleroy, and also we covered that one. Um, so yeah, so he's crossing over. This one doesn't feature a hip hop star, but like he is crossing over. He's crossing over that culture, and of course, we get more of Seagal's infamous black scent that he does in all of these movies, as well as in he often wheels it out in the reality TV series Lawman anytime he's talking to a black suspect. Like
Yeah, it's amazing because right, you get like here. I think the best one is every time he's interacting with somebody and they're like telling
Mhm.
him like oh, this is gonna be tough. Oh, I don't know if you're gonna be able to do that. These people are hardcore. They're gonna kill you or whatever. And he's like, I just want the motherfucker to kill my son. And it's like how he says it every time.
That's true. That's true. It's so, oh God.
Yeah.
It's so ridiculous. It's so
Yes.
ridiculous.
Well, maybe
Yeah.
I'll do a quick synopsis and then we can kind of dig in on some of the highlights to this because I think that to your
Hmm.
point, this is one that I think for a lot of people, if they catch a Seagal movie, a direct-to-video Seagal movie, it's this one, there's a mindset of like, okay, this isn't so bad, Whereas when you've seen 15 of these, it's definitely higher on the scale of 15, but you see all these other bad things in 15, from the previous 15 that someone who's just watching it once won't notice, I think, it's a
Yeah.
very unique kind of movie with this. But to your point, I think it is a better, of the 15 we've done, this one ranks a little bit higher, I think.
Yes, I think of the 15 we've done, I would rank this probably second after Pistol Whipped, which
Yeah.
is the gold standard of DTV Seagal movies.
Yes, I'm in the same boat for you, exactly for that. Yeah. So yeah, the basic premise of this is there's a young man who is it's hard to know if I guess he's a police officer. We find out he's a police officer, but early on I can't remember if it was like really obvious that he's a police officer or maybe a reporter or
It is
something.
not really obvious that he's a
Right.
police officer. It kind of goes back and forth. You're like, who is the? Um, because like when he's like following people, it's it wasn't obvious to me. I
Yeah.
thought like, oh, maybe he's an undercover cop, maybe he's an investigative journalist. Like it just didn't it wasn't super clear that he was an undercover cop, which is what it turns out to be.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, we find it out after, but he's stalking some people around, and he sees these two police officers shake down two guys in a fancy car, take their drugs and their money, and so he gets pictures of them because he's like, okay, these are dirty cops. And then he has an informant that says, hey, come meet me here. I've got something to talk to you about. When he goes to see the informant, he gets killed. So somebody drives by and shoots him. Okay, we don't know who did it. Seagal, we find out Seagal's his father. We find out he's a police officer and Seagal's his father. And his estranged wife, that the mother, says to Seagal, you need to find out who did this. So Seagal gets himself a really bad apartment in the middle of like that near the area where the son was killed. And he starts investigating, and he talks to a police officer who, or like I guess he was the captain or something.
Mm.
He's the higher up, but anyway, he's in a movie that I just recently talked about on the Deep Blue Sea podcast called Boa versus Python. It's actually the first movie we reviewed on the site here, Boa versus Python. The actor Kirk B.R. Waller, he plays an FBI agent in Boa versus Python as well. So this is kind of like his, you know, you know, uh, kind of heel-ish kind of cop. That's kind of, he plays that part well. He tells Seagal, hey, we don't have any leads, and Seagal's kind of like, that's interesting because usually when a cop dies, everybody is like, it's like the whole police force goes after him. So it's interesting that they just don't, so he senses something's up. He starts to kind of get in on this gang war between, what is it, the East Siders and the Hyde Park crew. So the East
Yeah.
Siders are African American, the Hyde Park crew are Mexican American, and they don't get along. And he gets kind of put on this goose chase where he's first told that it's the Hyde Park crew that did it. Danny Trejo's there. He's kind of like, hey, despite the fact that you beat the crap out of a bunch of my guys, I'm gonna have some tequila with you and tell you everything's cool. So then he's like, okay, it's definitely the East Siders. He starts to kind of dig and find his way through here, and eventually he uncovers the corruption involved, and the LAPD is working with the East Siders to deal drugs. And so once Seagal gets a hold of them, he gets a whole cache of weapons and he goes after them all. And that's kind of it. It's like a big, shootout. A lot of necks broken as well. But Scott, yeah, what were your thoughts on Urban Justice?
Well, this is I would say rewatching this for a second time. I maybe didn't have quite as much fun with it the first time I had it because like I'd seen some DTV ones and like this seemed like a kind of jewel in the rough kind of thing, whatever. But I kind of knew what I was getting this time, so like it wasn't quite the same experience, but I still enjoyed it. And I think like if you are a fan of these films and you were a fan of like Seagal's like kind of like peak period, like his kind of above the law through to Under Siege or whatever. Like that you get a lot more bang for your buck. There's a lot less stunt doubling. There is some funny stunt doubling in the movie, but there is a lot less of it. In this, you're mainly getting like Seagal is in pretty much most of the film. And when he is in the film, he's actually in the film, unlike something like Shadow Man, which is like just him being stunt doubled, like feels like 70% of the time. He's actually mainly on screen. And we get like a bunch of good fight sequences, kind of fun fight sequences. We get some funny action sequences because we get like a very obviously green screened car chase that's pretty hilarious. Like but we actually get um a yeah, we actually get a decent amount of action, and also because we've talked about this before. Um, the like the kick that Anderson Silva used to knock out Vitor Belfort, that kind of front foot kick, and
Yes.
like Seagal uses that offense a lot in this movie. He's yeah, he is just booting people right, left, and center.
Right, right. And I mean, at one point, he just nails a guy in the crotch like 5 times with that front kick. But you're right. He's also blasting people into like shelving and side tables with lamps on them and everything. Yeah, it's amazing. And that car chase, I want to get back to that car chase too, because one of the things I loved about the car chase, this is like direct to video, low budget movie making, like at its finest. With the car chase, there's these two guys that were trying to kill Seagal. They're chasing after him. Seagal's in this like Chrysler 300 or whatever, and they're in this big boat of a Cadillac or something chasing after him. And they're sticking out of the car and shooting, like a machine gun at him. Um, and the whole time that they're shooting the machine gun, they're not really hitting anything. And then they get near this warehouse area, and suddenly they're able to shoot out the back window. And I was like, oh, well, of course, because they didn't want to shoot out the back window in the middle of the street part of the chase because they want to be able to loop that and put other pieces in. And so you'd get these moments because you still get moments when he's driving that car where he's got a full windshield. And
Mhm.
so they were like, okay, we want to limit the amount of times that you're going to see a full windshield when we loop this back in. We want to use as much of the street footage as we can, which I thought was a brilliant, it's just, it's one of those things that you wouldn't, you don't think about, but then you're watching and you're like, yeah, that's why it took them that long to shoot out the back window when they were chasing him the whole time.
So they could just, yeah, they just loop that. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Which, like you say, that is very much classic DTV filmmaking, just getting as much, stretching out your buck as much as possible, like.
Right. Exactly. Like that. Now, one of the things I forgot to mention in my
Mhm.
synopsis was the head of the East Side Gang is Eddie Griffin, who I felt like he stole the movie. He was just a ton of fun as the baddie in this.
Yeah, and I don't know like what Eddie Griffin in this movie, I don't know how much direction he actually got, because a lot of what he does feels like he kind of was improvised or, like he's, I mean, um, I guess like a lot of these type of like gang characters, these black gang characters, he's obsessed with, he's obsessed with Scarface and he keeps quoting Scarface and he keeps doing like Pacino impersonations, which is, I mean, I guess this makes sense because I guess that makes sense because this is like 2007, so this would still be at the height of like Cribs, where every rapper that they featured on Cribs had like a poster of Scarface on their wall for some reason. Like,
That's right. Yeah, or maybe if they were really rich, they had the world is mine globe or something
yeah.
like that. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
that's
Yeah.
that's right. That's right. I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I know you have some younger listeners, so your younger listeners might not be remember MTV Cribs was very, very popular. Just one of the most insane programs, like just
Yeah.
ah dear. I mean, but entertaining, pure trash TV, but
Yeah.
entertaining.
Right. I remember one with Sean William Scott, like right after American Pie was big. So like he hadn't
Mhm,
really moved into a nice place yet. He still had like a roommate. He
mhm,
was in like a condo. But
mhm,
he was taking people around this condo, and they're in his bedroom, and there was a hole in like the sliding closet door thing.
mhm,
Or it was a hole in the wall, something like that. And he's like,
mhm.
yeah, just, night of drinking. Sometimes you just get angry about something. And I was like, oh my God, that's Cribs. Like, what are we doing? Sean William Scott showing us how he's an angry drunk and he punched a hole in his wall of this condo that he's living in because he hasn't, bought anything bigger yet because he's not, he just became a big star. It's like, yeah. I mean, they must have been hurting for content. There must have been a point where people were like, no, no, I don't want to do
Uh,
Cribs. We've done enough Cribs. And so it's like,
there's
Sean William
enough.
Scott? Right. Yeah.
There's enough cribs. Like I don't like reality TV, but
Right.
some of those MTV shows like that and of course Pimp My Ride
Hit my
with
right.
featuring hosted by Exhibit they pure trash, but like I did find them entertaining. I'm not gonna
Yeah.
lie.
Yeah. Well, because the stuff they would put in those cars, it was like it is kind of like this idea that you could essentially live out of your car. I mean, like I don't know how you play a video game in your car without it. I don't know how that affects the battery or whatever, but they'd have like the video game system in the car, and you're like, okay, yeah, I don't know who's playing that when, I mean, I guess now every
I
parent.
I I love like when they would like do like a kind of sound system where the speakers of the sound system were like the entire boot, and I was like,
Mhm.
that is going to kill you. Your head will explode if you listen to music. That like your entire boot is a speaker.
Right. Yes. Yeah. I had a friend who had like a big stereo system like that. It wasn't quite to that point, but it was essentially like you couldn't put anything in the trunk or the boot like that. Like you couldn't do it. And one of the things was it wasn't just like the treble part, but like the bass. You would feel it through the car. So you'd be sitting there and it would start to replace your heartbeat. Um, and it was kind of, I mean, in my 20s, I don't think it was a big deal. I think now, if I was sitting in a car like that now, I'd be a little bit nervous
Yeah.
about, how my heart
Yeah,
would be.
yeah, exactly, exactly. I mean, I love listening to music. I'm a metal fan. I love
Yeah,
listening to music loud, but I don't want my like rib cage to be vibrating.
right.
Like
Exactly.
that's not the experience I'm looking for. But
No.
maybe that's the experience some other people are looking for, just to have their rib cage explode in front of them.
Right, exactly. While you're in a 2 ton vehicle hurling down the road at high speeds, where you could also injure other human beings as well.
Yeah, it seems like it all seems like a good idea.
Right, exactly, exactly, exactly. But yeah, yeah, you're right. Like Eddie Griffin is really bringing that kind of vibe. I mean, he's just like his one-liners are all over the place. He's just killing people here and there. But he wanted to bring a sinister element to it as well. I think, which I think was good that he was like kind of both. Like sinister and enough of a baddie that you want to see Seagal take him down, but yet entertaining at the same time with the great one-liners and stuff like that. It's like. I mean, I guess that's what you want when you do a movie like this and you bring in an Eddie Griffin. And
Yeah.
it, it's interesting to think about if they had filmed this in Bulgaria because they wouldn't have probably gotten Eddie Griffin. They probably would have gotten somebody from England to play this part, and it probably would have been a completely different performance than what they had here. So it's interesting how that dynamic works sometimes.
I mean, that's true. That's true. I mean, like, I mean, the first time I watched this, I was like thrown by it. I was like, because I was like looking into the film, and I was like, what? The villain is Undercover Brother? Like, I just was just really, really thrown by it. I was like, I
Yeah.
can't imagine him as like menacing or anything, but he's good.
Yeah.
He like, um, I'm like. And like it is interesting though because like he is one of those like classic villains where when you kind of take if you think about it like on a kind of logical level, you kind of think like he is one of those classic villains that you wonder why anybody works for him because like he's clearly a psychopath. But beyond psychopath, he's clearly like very unstable. He's constantly killing people who he works with.
Right.
Whether it's like kind of people he's partner not with or people in his own gang, he's constantly killing people. He has like a really weird moment where he tells off Isaiah, who's like who's one of the characters who's trying to kill Seagal and is the brother of the informant Gary. Um, and he tells him off, and then he just standing by the window and he rambles to himself. And like before Isaiah came into the room, he had like these three beautiful women around him, and like and he's like, "You go upstairs, you play with yourselves, and I'll be with you in a minute," that kind of thing. And then he's talking at the window, and he just suddenly completely flips the other way, and he's like, "Ah, you skinny hoes, get out of my house." Taking all my drugs, fuck you, like you know and he's just and you're like this why is anybody supporting this guy why does anybody want to be around this guy? Clearly he has many issues, many mental issues that you don't want to be around, but he is yeah, he is entertaining and is like, and I do wonder how much of like Eddie Griffin's line were in the script and how much is just him kind of spitballing.
Well, to your point, because that scene, where he's like, you bitches get out of here and all that stuff. He's like, I ain't killed a bitch in a long time, and then you hear a gunshot go off. It's like off screen.
That's
It's like off
true.
set. I wonder if
That's true.
Fauntleroy was like, oh, I guess we need to kill. We need to have a gunshot to make it sound like he killed someone when he was just
Yeah.
going off just improvising.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, murder not funny, but the way he phrases it, where he says, "I ain't killed a bitch in a week," there's just the odd specificness of the week, you know? It's like that's, it's like oh yeah, it's like it's a whole 7 days since you last murdered somebody. Like, like, so it's almost like he was talking about Quinn smoking or something, like you know what I mean? Like, oh, I've not had it, it's the way he threw it off like that, you would think he was talking about something, but no, he's talking about murdering people. Like it's just so weird.
But I do wonder if he watched the final product and heard that gunshot after, and he was like, "Oh,
Oh.
I was just saying that just to say it. I didn't mean that my character was actually going to kill anybody." But Fauntleroy's just like, "Oh, we got to keep that line in because it's great, but we need a gunshot to like button it or whatever." I'm just guessing. I don't know, or maybe they did intend for him to have killed it because to make him as bad as
Oh,
possible. But yeah.
that's right. In that same scene, I forgot this. I forgot this. Um, he in the same scene, he also says a line where he's like, um, um, he's basically saying this line to himself that you just can't get the right people anymore. And he's like, and he's talking about all these kind of young hoods, and they're no good. And then he says, all these little motherfuckers crunk dancing and shit. And like, again, I was just like, that's such a random line. And also very specifically 2007, because crunk popular in the mid 2000s and only the mid 2000s.
Exactly. Got one away. Right. Right. Exactly. Somebody was talking about that, how like the scary movies, whatever,
Uh-huh.
like those
Yeah, yeah,
parody
yeah.
movies that like at some point in like the 2010s they just became these are things that are happening in this moment and we're going to reference them. Like it wasn't
Yeah,
actual
yeah.
jokes. And it is kind of funny how movies a lot of times they'll do that. Like they'll reference something thinking like Crunk is going to be, like, oh, everybody's going to get this forever. And it's like, I don't think remember that these movies are going to be around for, like we're watching this
Yeah.
one almost 20 years later. And yeah, Crunk didn't last that long. Crunk dancing
Yeah,
or
no, that's true. That's true. I mean, I remember I've been experimenting doing a little bit of stand-up comedy, and I was watching one of my friends doing stand-up comedy, and he made a joke, and this was like the audience were like in maybe their 20s, I guess. Um, and he made a joke referencing Little John, and I found it hilarious, and then these people in their 20s were like just blank faced. I
which
know. I was like, yeah, I guess Little John's fame didn't really make it out of the 2000s.
well, what's funny is that like because Gen Z doesn't drink here in America,
Uh,
one of the beer companies they've been doing commercials. Or maybe it's just one commercial with Little John,
uh-huh.
because again, like they got to market to older people who would know who he is because younger people aren't buying alcohol, and so I think they're still trying to figure out ways to do that. I know Bud Light had that the situation where they had a trans influencer
Oh,
doing
the
Bud Light, right?
Dylan Mulvaney or
Yeah,
Dylan
something like that.
somebody. Yeah,
Yes, yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
it's
Yeah,
trans women. Yeah,
right. And so they thought, okay, that might appeal to Gen Z, and
yeah,
and it ended up having the opposite effect because Gen Z still didn't care because they're like, well, you're just pandering to us. We don't, we're not going to buy. But then they had like Kid Rock shooting like like machine guns at their Bud Light or whatever. It was like all kinds of ridiculous stuff because it was like now they're like leaning back into that MAGA kind of market of because they just kind of realized like that's where we sell Bud Lights the most is and so
I
um
mean, yeah, like, because I don't know how long the partnership has been. But when you're like the official sponsor beer of the UFC, obviously you have a right-leaning audience.
Right. And yeah, and I think the thing is that like there's this idea that like, oh, if we just attach ourselves to whoever people, and that does work on certain like I think like for example with so the right-leaning audience, if you attach yourself to a certain right-leaning influencer or celebrity, that segment of the population will latch onto it and start buying stuff and being like, oh, this is what I'm going to buy now. I mean, obviously, Trump has a huge grift on like teddy bears and crypto coins and things
Yeah,
like
yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah.
But then there's the other segment of the population that's just like, I don't care who this person is that's selling it to me. Like I don't know who a big person would be for Gen Z, like maybe Timothy Chalamet or somebody like that. But I don't think he
Mm.
would be enough to like sway a bunch of Gen Z kids to go out and buy beer because Timothy Chalamet was drinking it. Like it's like a kind of a different population. But yeah, it is.
I guess so. Although I think there is some people who like push the who what is that phrase? Push the needle? Like
Oh
that's
yes,
like,
yeah, move
or
the needle.
whatever.
Yeah,
Like
move the needle.
like
Yeah,
I think there is some people like, but maybe not just like with alcohol or whatever. Like
yeah,
for example, I think like if I mean I'm sure she does. I've not researched it, but I'm sure this already exists. But for example, if like Taylor Swift had a
oh,
fragrance, I'm sure she probably does have a perfume.
yeah,
Most pop stars seem to. So I'm sure that like it being like Taylor Swift perfume or whatever, I'm
yeah.
sure that moves the needle for young women
That's
who are like Jane, or whatever. Like, so I
yeah,
think there's certain things that like move the needle more. And I do feel like maybe as much as I think that, obviously there is very popular kind of movie stars, the Timothy Chalamets and the Margaret Qualleys and the Glenn
yeah,
Powells and the Sydney Sweeneys and all that. I do think that like nowadays, like pop stars like move the needle more than movie
yeah,
stars. Um,
yeah,
like the big, and like, and maybe if I don't know what the product would be, but like maybe if that same beer, for example, was like being pushed by Bad Bunny or
right,
something,
yeah,
or Kendrick Lamar, like maybe
yeah.
that would have more impact on an international scale than Timothy Chalamet, as much as Timothy Chalamet is one of the biggest young movie stars there is.
No, you make a great point because Bad Bunny, I think he did the Super Bowl halftime show that had a lot of young people, saying, "Hey, that was actually pretty cool. I actually kind of like that. Like, the NFL can actually be cool." And so yeah, I think that's a good point. That yeah, I think obviously now concert culture has changed here in America a little bit. I don't know what it's like in the rest of the world, but here because ticket prices are so exorbitant that like a lot of Gen Z kids can't afford to go to concerts, and so, but then
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
also
No,
it's kind
that's the
of,
same
yeah,
worldwide because,
yeah,
like, I can't speak to worldwide. What I can speak to is the Western world
yeah,
because, and obviously this is a different podcast and we could all rant about this for hours, just like we could rant
right,
about FIFA. But whether it's Australia, whether it's here in New Zealand, whether it's back home in the UK, whether it's in America, Ticketmaster have a stranglehold on concerts and events. And because of that, because of the monopoly they have, they can be absolute bastards, and they are absolute bastards, and they get away with it because there's no other game in town really. And people who have tried to circumvent that game, like Pearl Jam did in the 90s for a few years, like it was just backbreaking work for them to find non-Ticketmaster venues that were big enough to host a band of Pearl Jam's scale, and they just had to do everything themselves, and like it just became exhausting, and they just couldn't concentrate on the music anymore, and then they had to go back to being in Ticketmaster venues. But Pearl Jam still try to like price cap their gigs as much as they can, and are one of the good guys. But yeah.
yeah, no, that's a good point because it is, I think, too, and I think because older people have more, disposable income and go see concerts still. I think this is something that kind of predated us a little bit, where baby
Yeah,
boomers were going to see people like Michael McDonald or
yeah,
James Taylor and shelling out huge amounts of money to sit in folding chairs and drink, wine out of plastic cups, and watch these musicians, these acts that they love for so long do that. Now that Gen X is in that category where Gen X has the money to go to some of these shows, they aren't quite as affluent, I don't think, as the baby boomers were at that time. There was a lot of baby
mhm,
boomers that had money to be able to do that kind of thing. And now it just sort of keeps trickling down. I think millennials maybe had more money than Gen X, but Now it's sort of hit that breaking point where, the enshittification of concerts through Ticketmaster. Plus, they own Live Nation, which is like, to your point, how they own the
Yeah,
venues. They
yeah,
have that
yeah, yeah.
um, yeah. So it's like kids love artists, they love music, and they love these, but they're not going to go see them in concerts. So yeah, maybe how artists are going to have to make money now because it used to be they used to be you could make money off selling your music because you had publishing rights and you'd sell copies of the music. Now you can't make any money selling the music. So now, it became, all right, well, can I make money licensing my music to commercials and um, doing concerts? Well, now they can't do concerts
Hmm.
anymore because they've been priced out of that. So it's really just going to be advertising stuff, I guess, right? Like they can only being like influencers and endorsers. I guess that's where
Hmm.
musicians will make money.
Yeah, I think like over the course, like yeah, I mean, like I guess like some of those bigger, I mean, like yeah, I know what you mean, like less people going to concerts, but no, yeah, like you say, it went from being like you made your money from like albums, and that was true from like the early days of rock and roll through to like kind of the end of the 90s.
Yeah.
But then it started in the 2000s, it started shifting towards the bulk of their money actually came from like concerts and merchandising, like and merchandising became much big. Like there was always merchandising, particularly kings of merchandising, Kiss, who merchandised everything going way
That's
back to the 70s. But like so like yeah, a lot of bands were making more from T-shirt sales than they were their music, like
right.
but yeah, but I don't know, like you say, I mean, syncing, like the kind of like getting your music in commercials and TV shows and stuff like that. But like that's a very small percentage of people who get into that game. Bands need to have a high enough profile to kind of get into that. So like, yeah, it's really difficult to it is really difficult to make a living as like like a newer artist. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, great. Yeah. Now I'm trying to think, I'm trying to work back how this where this tangent came from because it was we were talking about it, Gen Z or people that would influence Gen Z to buy things. And
yes.
yeah, and I'm trying to think where that came from because I know we were talking about because
We
drinking, right?
we
Was it
we
because
were
Gen Z doesn't
talking about
drink?
alcohol. We were talking about Bud Light, and then we were talking about how
Yeah.
we talk about that. Yeah,
Right,
yeah,
exactly, exactly.
yeah.
But so yeah, so you mentioned this movie had some great fights, and I thought
Ah,
maybe I'd go
yeah.
to the first one because I thought the first one is a little bit interesting in the fact that we've been doing a good amount of these Steven Seagal movies, and there's a lot of different bingo card points that come up. But one of the more interesting ones is Mr. Seagal's relationship with the fast food franchise McDonald's, and his first fight actually happens in front of a McDonald's. When he rents the place in the bad neighborhood, actor Carmen Serrano, she runs the convenience store downstairs that has the apartments upstairs, and she moves him into his apartment. He goes down to get his bag, and there's
Yeah,
two members of the Hyde Park gang hanging out his car. And to this point, all we've seen is the liquor store and where the apartments are and everything, that side of the street. When we
yeah,
turn and see the gangsters that are coming to fight Seagal, we see that they're in front of a full McDonald's with a play place. It looks like it's attached to a gas station as well. I think there's like a Circle K gas station next to it, but it's like the
yeah.
big play place, which I don't even know if McDonald's in America have those as much anymore. Like I don't, I think they've kind of shrunk their footprint. Um, but so it's like as Seagal's beating the crap out of these guys, we're constantly getting shots of the McDonald's behind them. It's like I don't, there's something about the Seagal McDonald's product placement.
Nah, yeah. Yeah, I like I don't know. I wonder, but you never know if that's like a deliberate placement,
Right.
or not, or if it was just or if it was just kind of there. Um, because like sometimes you get like these like very deliberate kind of placements that you get in movies. Uh, the for some reason the one that always sticks out in my head, the one of the most hilarious ones, just because like they don't exist now, is there is a horror movie called Dracula 2000, and Dracula 2000 is like officially sponsored by Virgin Megastores, and like you get like tons of well, one of the main characters works in the Virgin Megastores. You get tons of shots of Virgin Megastores. Like it's like one of the most hilarious product placements I've ever seen in a film because it just so forces it down your throat in like every kind of second or third scene kind of thing of like you're constantly getting it. Um, but yeah, but this didn't feel quite so deliberate. I feel like this is maybe just kind of the store was there. It didn't feel, and I'm not sure that like, because like I guess my thinking is that how much would McDonald's be interested in like sponsoring this film necessarily? You know, like maybe they would. Maybe they'd be like, ah, yeah, okay. It's like a DTV film. It's like something that people watch on a Friday night, and they might be getting McDonald's. So like maybe it's a deliberate product placement. Um, but the things I wanted, the thing I want to mention about um uh this scene is you get like a couple of funny lines. Like you don't often get a funny Seagal line, but I did think this one was pretty good. When the guy is like smack talking him, the big Mexican fella, he says. Seagal's character Simon says, "Take your lively, chubby ass and get the fuck off my car." I don't know. It's just, there's something about the, I don't know. There's something about the pairing of lively and chubby that I thought was was quite funny.
Yeah. And I can't remember what the guy says, but he's just like, I'm gonna like kick your ass or something like that. Like,
Yeah,
it's kind of this thing where you get a line like that, and the line after it doesn't really meet like it's like so unspectacular. It's like essentially like
yeah,
a
no, no,
you know
it's kind of a dud line. You want
right.
like a you want like a quip back. Although that guy's friend, when he sees his friend like beaten up, um, like like what you call the chop foo slap foo,
Right.
his friend his friend says kung fu this motherfucker, and then proceeds to get kicked in the face.
Because he has the gun and he thinks he's going to shoot
Yeah,
him with the gun. And this is
yeah.
like classic Seagal, right? Is that the whole point of having a gun is that you can range your opponent. You
Yeah,
can
yeah, yeah,
damage them without getting close to them. That's the whole point of the
yeah, yeah.
gun. And everybody, including this guy, gives up that advantage by walking towards him and closing the distance. And then Seagal just slaps the gun away and then just like twists him around and then throws him into his car and stuff.
Yes. Eddie Griffin later makes this mistake in the movie where he goes, "Oh no, you didn't bring a fist to a gunfight." And he's like, "I did," and then just takes the gun off him.
Right. Yes, exactly. Yeah. Well, and that's the other thing about this is that we get these one-liners, we get these moments that, again, I think this is the kind of movie that like had somebody stumbled upon this on Blockbuster who like was a fan of old Seagal movies, probably
Yeah.
would be like, okay, this isn't as good as those old Seagal movies, but hey, Seagal still got it, right? Like they wouldn't see this movie in the sea of other Seagal direct-to-video movies that come out at this time. They would just see it as a
Mhm.
one-off and be like, okay, and I'll start renting other ones. And I wonder how many it would take after you watch this one to realize how bad the other ones are. Like, I don't know if it's like three or like I don't know what the momentum of this movie would get you when it comes to other because the other
Well, it
direct videos are so
depends.
bad.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Like, but like it depends what you get. It
Yeah,
depends what Blockbuster selection is. Like if you pick up
yeah,
this movie and watch this movie, and then you're like, oh, okay, this is like you say, not as good as like the his like first five movies, but like, but it's not bad. And then if you say like your next one is say like Pistol Whipped, which was their favorite, and then maybe you rent something like The Keeper, which is like again a bit below the level of this or Pistol Whip, but still pretty solid, pretty entertaining, you know. Like if that's your sequence, like it maybe take you a few before you realize. But like if you rent this and watch this, and then your next one is like Attack Force, then you would learn like super quickly. You'd be like, oh okay, the bomb
Right.
has truly fallen out. You know, so it depends what your next one you pick up is, you know,
Right. Right.
if your sequence is like this pistol whipped the keeper, you're like okay, but if your sequence is like this attack force submerged, then you'd be
Right.
like, oh God, all right, I gotta stop watching these immediately.
Exactly. Or even Out for a Kill. Like, I think if
Oh
you
yeah,
don't
yeah.
go into Out for a Kill wanting like a goofy time, like you're watching that barbershop scene where the guy's doing like monkey foo and crawling all over the walls, and you're like, what in the hell is going on here? And he's an archaeologist. He's taking a date to his wife's funeral. It's like, what is going on in this movie, right? It's like,
That's very true. That's very true. You need to um I guess like to truly appreciate the true genius of Out for a Kill, you need to have like a quite a an ironic MST3K kind of sensibility to you. And some people don't have that. Some people can't watch movies like that. They
yeah,
just want a movie to they want a movie to be good.
yeah,
And like they you know like so if you can yeah, if you can't view it through that lens, if you've not got that kind of like something, you know, you're not the type of person who's like, let's rent this bad movie that we know is bad because we can riff on it, you know, or whatever, and do our own kind of like MST3K light kind of commentary or whatever, then yeah, you're probably gonna have a bad time with Out for a Kill or Out of Reach, the last one we did.
right out of reach. Or Into the Sun, where you've got voodoo dolls and uh,
Oh yeah,
bow and
Into the
arrows getting.
Sun.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean. Yeah, it's like so this it's like it's a weird like spectrum for Seagal where you've got movies like this where
Mm.
you're like, okay, I liked his first, like I said, first five movies. This is not as good as those, but I'm entertained by it. It's like, okay, Seagal still got
Hmm.
it. This isn't bad. Then you've got ones that are just bad, right? Like you said, like Submerged, or Tact Force, where you're just like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
this,
You're just like,
yeah,
this is why am I watching this? Why
right,
did I like? I guess I'm podcasting about this. I guess I do have to get to the end,
exactly,
but I feel crushed.
right,
Um,
right,
yeah,
yeah.
that's
And then
true.
And
Yeah.
then you got these bonkers ones, like Out for which the funny thing is Attack Force kind of falls into a few different categories because it's like
Ah,
really bad, but also really bonkers. But like, yeah, these bonkers ones like Out for a Kill or Into the Sun, where you're just like, where is he coming up with it? Because it's partly him. Like it's just like where
oh,
you know,
it's definitely partly, particularly Into the Sun, which is
yeah,
obviously feels like it's got a lot of Seagal influence. Obviously,
yeah,
Into the Sun's like set in Japan, and it's
yeah,
got like a lot of like, you know, a lot of like Seagal being the noble samurai warrior type, you know, tropes, you know,
right,
and
yeah,
stuff like that. So yeah, but like, and I guess like you know, circling back to this movie, I think that one of this movie's strengths is like, and like the reason that maybe people can kind of jump on it a bit more is unlike a lot of DTV Seagal, and unlike a lot of DTV action generally, I guess, um, this has like this has like the most basic of basic plots, whereas like you got a lot of these movies, like Mercenary for Justice, like Into the Sun, like Submerged, like Shadow Man, which have like absurdly convoluted plots that you're like that have all these different elements, that have all these different things going on, that have all these kind of moving parts, and you're like, who's this character? How do they connect? What's this? Do I need to remember this? You know, like, you know, there's a lot, you know, like, and it's weird because like a lot of those movies, particularly something like a Shadow Man, which has got a spy plot, it's like incredibly dumb, but also like incredibly confusing at the same time because of like how convoluted the plotting is. You know, like you're just entering all these kind of labyrinthine plots, whereas this is very much just a you know basic bitch revenge plot. That's what we got, and it's fine.
yes. Well, and to your point about like different types of padding, we kind of get like main character lying padding here because essentially
Mm,
we know who the bad guy is. We know from the very beginning who the bad guy is. It's kind of like a Columbo episode in that sense. Even though they don't show
mm-hmm.
him commit the crime, we know he's the one who does it. And so we're just waiting to see how Seagal figures it out. And really, the way he figures it out is this kid Gary, who was the one who actually gets the main the son killed, not meaning to. He wants to try to warn the son, hey, they're coming to kill you, and he doesn't get there in time. But he's like an informant for the son. And so Seagal is, getting information from him, and he's like leading him in the wrong places a lot of times.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually Gary admits, like, yeah, I was afraid for my life. That's why I wasn't telling you the truth. But here's the truth. It was the dirty cop, it was the guy from Boa versus Python. That's who killed your son. And it's almost like you could have told us that 45 minutes before, and we would have had a 30-minute movie and been okay. But and I
Yeah,
guess
that's true.
yeah, but I was gonna say, like, do we prefer that to, like you said, like the convoluted plots? So, it's like
I
at least
think
this is more straightforward.
generally it is more straightforward. Sometimes the convoluted plots work if they're like bonkers.
Right.
Like the things like Into the Sun and Out of Reach. Like I appreciate the convoluted plots because it just adds to the already madness of the film of like who wrote this, who directed this, who even could have possibly thought of this, as so like so there's that. But then if the movie is like boring, like super boring, like an Attack Force or whatever, or Submerged, then the
Yeah.
convoluted plot just adds to the annoyance of the film. So I guess it really depends on a kind of case by case basis. I did that talking about the informant that did make me think of one of the funny quirks of the script of this movie is and I this doesn't happen a lot in real life, and it's just something that stood out to me. Is people continually introduce themselves with their full name. They're like, when he goes into the convenience store, he's like, "Hi, I'm Simon Ballister," and she's like, "Hi, I'm Alice Park," and like, and the informant is like, "Hi, I'm Gary Morrison," and you're like, "Do people talk like this?" Like, I don't like usually when I introduce myself, I don't be like, "Hi, I'm Scott Murphy." I'm just like, "Hi, I'm Scott." Like what?
Exactly. It's what it's like. So I'm in a writers group here in Philadelphia, and we do, like, once a month we get together and people will submit, and you kind of give suggestions on what they submit or
Yeah.
whatever. And a lot of times on these like rough drafts that we get, you'll see like full names being used. Jim
Mm,
Morgan said, Jim Morgan, oh, hi, Jim Morgan, how, or something like that. And someone will always say, like, yeah, you shouldn't use their full names, or try mixing in some pronouns, some he's and she's or whatever, to sort of mix it up a little bit. And that kind of gives me the sense that this might have been a bit of a rough draft of a script, that like
mm,
it needed some read-throughs where it's like when you write it down the first time, it doesn't sound that crazy. It's almost like a placeholder when you're doing it the first time.
mm-hmm,
And then once you read through it and you see like there's three, Max Ballisters in the same paragraph, you're like, okay, I need two he's and one Max Ballister, or just one Max even. Once we
mm-hmm,
have his name as it's like kind of like Wikipedia, right? When you go through a Wikipedia page and the first
mm-hmm,
mention is a hyperlink to the other page, and the rest of the times
mm-hmm.
there's no hyperlink. It's like, okay, we don't need the hyperlink every time, we don't need the full name every time they're mentioned. But I think that's what it was. I think this was just another one of these, like, you know, slap together scripts. I mean, I think what is that? Halpin? Is that his name? The one who writes
Joe
Joel
Halpin.
Halpin?
Yeah,
Yeah.
he's done a bunch of Segals. Yeah, he's a regular Segal collaborator. Yeah.
Right, exactly. I think he was a
Mhm.
producer on this as
Yes,
well.
he was a producer on this.
Yeah.
One of the producers. I think he came up as like co-producer or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I
Um,
wonder, yeah, it's one of those things that, like you said, you notice it. And I wonder if it's something that Fauntleroy noticed after, and he was just like, I'm not getting people back to ADR these scenes. I'm just going with it, or something. I don't know.
yeah. So Halpin was just a producer. He didn't actually write this. It was
Right.
written by a guy called Gilmar Fortis II, um, who only has like one other credit,
Yeah.
according to um, Letterbox. Um, yeah.
Yeah.
So
So
yeah. Anyway, so like yeah, and this was his first credit. So like you say, maybe it was just like a rough draft, and it was supposed to be polished later. But I didn't notice that there's just a lot of people, like you say, like Max Ballister, a lot of people just being full named all the time. It's just kind of like, oh yes, that Detective Frank Shaw. Most people Detective Shaw when they
Right.
say, but um. Uh, yeah, just one of those quirks that I noticed. I've just been like, yeah, everybody's getting full named all the time, yeah.
Well, what's interesting too, because this is kind of the earlier days of IMDb. I guess IMDb had run out for like
Yeah.
maybe like 10 years at this point. I wonder if IMDb culture had started to creep in a little bit too, where it's like if these actors are going to be in this low budget movie, you mention their full name so people can look them up in the thing and in their bios more easily. I guess I don't know. It seems like it's probably more a rough draft thing than anything,
Yeah,
but
yeah, yeah. Although, to be fair to the film, I do prefer this to what often happens in DTV action films where people don't mention character names at all, so you're
yeah,
completely lost to who people are. You're like, who is this person?
yeah.
Did I miss their name? Did they, was it said once? Or so sometimes, I actually prefer this to being lost as to who characters are and just being like, oh, I know who that actor is, and just in my head being like naming them as the actor rather than like as the character because I don't have a fucking clue what the character name is.
Right. Well, because then also too, you get actors who don't have headshots on IMDb, or
Yeah.
maybe their headshot is so out of date, or maybe it's so new, right? This is a movie from 2007. It could be a modern headshot and they look nothing like that person. So yeah, or like Carmen Serrano, who's in this movie, she did Breaking Bad the next year, and she was in the first season of Breaking Bad. I don't really remember who her character was on that show. I can't remember. I can't because I think it was a kind of an in and out type of character where she wasn't on for that long. She did like 9 episodes. So I was having trouble trying to remember
Uh,
who she was on the show. Oh no, I think I know who she was, Carmen Serrano. I think she was the principal or the assistant principal at the high school.
okay. I must say, to my shame, I've still never actually seen Breaking Bad. I
Right.
apologize to the TV gods. Um, uh, but um, but yeah, it's still something
Yeah, I
I've not
think
got
you'd I
around
think
to.
you'd like it. I think it's, for prestige TV, I think it's a pretty good one. Yeah, so that's who she was. She was the principal. So but yeah, I think you know, in terms of prestige TV, and it's an interesting thing how these actors kind of come, how they're usually like one or two things away from breaking out, and getting that bigger role, and but it's like I guess you don't know these roles are coming when you agree to do the Steven Seagal direct-to-video movie. And I was reading the trivia that she had a horrible time working with Seagal, that he apparently made her cry at one point, which I guess this is the kind of thing, right? When we talk about Seagal being on set or not being on set, is that when you have him on set for a lot of the movie, that means everybody has to interact with him more. So maybe it's better that he's only there for a few hours and he's being doubled most of the time because then people don't have these kind of experiences with him.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Um, yeah, I mean, yeah, the less Seagal time on set, the better, I think, for most people. Um, but yeah, no, poor Carmen Serrano. I mean, obviously, we've just discussed at length Seagal's treatment of female co-stars and uh, his often aggressive or in many cases creepy behavior towards his female. I mean, I guess towards all of his co-stars, because he's often been accused of being aggressive or being bullying towards his male co-stars as well. But obviously, and there's been accounts of him pushing people around, but obviously there's been much more serious allegations made against him by a litany of female co-stars that he has worked with, which is yeah, I mean, as we've discussed several times throughout doing this series, um, we enjoy talking about these films because they're silly and wacky and wild and because they have these recurring Seagal tropes that we just think are kind of hilarious and kind of feed into Seagal being one of the most ridiculous human beings who's ever lived. And but like yeah, I mean again, it is worth pointing out that he has you know his actions have had very serious real world consequences, and he is a terrible, terrible, terrible human being, and we should never lose sight of just how terrible he really is. As much as we've enjoyed some of the films he did, and I guess like some people can't separate the two, and that's fair play to them because like maybe you feel like you're endorsing a terrible human being, but and it's a case by case basis for myself. I can there's some people that I've like Marilyn Manson that I've like stopped listening to, but then there's other people like Woody Allen, who I've like continued to watch his films, despite the fact that he's obviously a pretty awful human, who's done, depending on whose account you believe, a variety of terrible things, ranging from merely very creepy to behavior to to violent, you know, sexual assault behavior, pedophilic behavior, which is obviously about the worst thing a person can do. What it probably is, because it's, at least murder you can kind of understand, in some cases. So yeah, just awful. But it's this whole separating the art from the artist thing is just it's a minefield, and I guess like people are often, like I say, often like myself, very hypocritical. They've like stopped, I stopped watching Louis C.K. I stopped listening to Marilyn Manson, but I've continued to watch Woody Allen's older films. So like, I'm just as much of a hypocrite as most people, I guess.
Well, I think the Seagal part of it, I think, because we're not celebrating him, I think that
Yes.
makes it a little, that definitely makes it different. I think
It makes it easier. It makes it way easier. Yeah, 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 yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, I think even like you watching Woody Allen movies, it's different from if we were doing podcast episodes celebrating, if we were just like, all right, we're going to talk about, I don't know, like Hannah and her sisters today, and it's just like, what a great
Mm.
movie this was. And look at how great, we're not doing that, like, I think even like just watching a Woody Allen movie is different from like if we were just extolling the virtues of, and then ignoring the other stuff, and I think that's the other part of it
Yeah,
too.
no,
Yeah.
no,
Yeah.
I understand what you're talking about, and I do feel like, and it is, and like film is obviously a very collaborative medium, and
Right.
and like I do feel like it is unfortunate for some people, like for example, like with a movie like, for example, like The Usual Suspects.
Yeah.
Like, should we stop watching The Usual Suspects? I find it uncomfortable to watch The Usual Suspects now because of like the Kevin Spacey stuff and the Bryan Singer stuff, and less serious, but still just as annoying, the fact that Stephen Baldwin is a bit of a nut. But like, but mainly because of the Kevin Spacey stuff and the Bryan Singer stuff, which are very, very serious allegations. Um, but then like, but then you think about like, does Gabriel Byrne deserve that? Does Benicio del Toro's not done anything to anybody. He's still a cool guy, Like, can we not just can we enjoy it for can we not Chaz Palminteri, he's not done anything wrong,
Well, and I think this is to your
it's
point.
it's difficult.
I think to your point, I think it's kind of what you're kind of able to sort of stomach or manage, And
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think like talking about Kevin Spacey, I think it's Usual Suspects is one thing, right? Because it's sort of a darker movie, a gangster kind of movie, and like you said, it's got an interesting cast with all kinds of people in it. But it's different from something like, say, American Beauty, where his character is
Yeah,
hooking up with a high school girl. I mean, Yusuf Rory obviously was out of high school at the time, but that's the whole point of the movie.
yeah.
It's like, okay, so now we've got somebody who is, that had, done predatory behavior in the past, and they're kind of doing the same thing in the movie. It's like, okay, that was like kind of an indie darling at the time when it came out, American Beauty. And but then to your point, like, oh, Wes Bentley was good in American Beauty. Like, yeah, do we not appreciate his performance in that movie.
Yeah.
So that yeah,
That's
you're
true. I think I think like the conversation like that's a very interesting case study. I think like American Beauty because like I think that like the way it just is a movie that reads totally differently. You know, even if like Kevin Spacey had no allegations of predatory behavior, I think that that's a movie that like opinion would have shifted on it anyway. I mean,
yeah.
like I still think it's a pretty good movie, but I think that like the way that the movie is freighted so much in in Kevin Spacey's character, I think the character is Lester, like
Yeah, I think so.
in his favor, in like you know the movie feels very supportive of that character, and then the Annette Bening character is made as this kind of like shrill kind of caricature of like the nagging wife or whatever. And I think like the cultural conversation of that movie would have shifted anyway because it's like it's kind of like a midlife crisis movie that's like not really partially satirizing midlife crisis, but still seems very much on the guy's side. Whereas I think if that movie was made today or even within the last 10 years, it would be a very different movie where the female characters would have a bit more agency and aren't kind of presented as either kind of fantasy sex objects or kind of like these kind of shrill bitchy caricatures.
Yeah, no, I totally agree there. I think that's another good point that it's like, it was released in the 90s in that sort of that indie darling period.
Hmm.
And I think we've kind of come to reckon with a good amount of that indie darling period because it was very I don't want to say male gaze-ish, but it was sort of like this idea of like sort of celebrating certain things that like we've now kind of looked at now as we're saying like okay these are not things that were necessarily there to be celebrated. I think another I'd say trope of that period was the broken woman, whether she was
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
neurodivergent or she caused it, it was committed petty crimes or something like that. And then you have this male character that the male director would sort of use as his surrogate to either try to fix her or like, oh, I'm the only one who understands her and we're going to live happily ever after. And it's like those indie movies at the time, they felt like they were saying something different about, they were talking about different people and they were saying, but now you kind of look back on them and you're like, no, there was still kind of this weird, like, oh, I've got a thing for the quirky girl kind of thing that was going in
Yeah.
those.
I mean that's true. That's true. And again, I guess it's like, balancing the two things.
Mhm.
You can like appreciate something, but
Yeah.
also but also feel uncomfortable with certain elements of it. It's a bit
Yeah.
like I was reading a book, which is kind of mainly a politics book, called Doppelganger by the journalist Naomi Klein. Um, and like it goes into all sorts of elements to do with conspiracy, to do with the alt-right, to do with things. But there is a passage on it that she's discussing kind of literature. This is like a part where she's talking about kind of Jewish identity. And and she was talking about her complicated relationship with the novels of Philip Roth
Yeah.
because Philip Roth is a very intelligent writer. He has, brilliant, searing insights into Jewish identity, into masculinity, into the fragile male ego, into American politics, into, general more international geopolitics. But as she pointed out, most of the female characters in Philip Roth's novels have all the depth of a nurse in a Benny Hill sketch. And I think I'm like directly paraphrasing Noah McLean there. And I
Yeah.
agree. I've read a few Philip North novels, and mostly I find them brilliant. But the female characters are awful. Like he is one of the worst writers for a high level kind of like person who was like constantly, like thought he was going to get the Nobel Prize or whatever.
Yeah.
Like for like a somebody who's on the kind of Mount Rushmore of American writers of the last like
Yeah.
50 years or whatever, like, and like who wrote so brilliantly in so many ways. His female characters are awful.
Well, yeah, so there's one I remember, I think it was The Humbling, where
Oh,
the main
yes.
is that the one the main character is a playwright who
Yes, that's
starts
right.
sleeping with his friend's friends who were a couple, their daughter who
Yeah,
was a
yeah, that's
lesbian.
right. Yeah,
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 yeah. And so,
that's the
um,
one.
yeah, and it's like you're reading it, and it's like I think he was trying something there, but he was. I think it was one of those things where he wrote a female character and thought how hot it would be to hook up with her, and it's like. And it's like when you're reading the stuff, you're like, okay, this is really transgressive. He's really going out there on certain things. But to your point, though, too, it's like, what did we glean from that female character? Like she doesn't, because again, it's I think it was told first. It like he's a third person limited or first person, from the main character standpoint. And
Mm,
again, he's like, hooking up with a woman who's again, a generation younger than him. It's essentially his friend's daughter, and yeah, it was, and I think he tried to mitigate it by the fact that we find out she was kind of using him and she wasn't really,
hmm
and I think that's one of these interesting quirks I think that happens too sometimes that it's like, oh, well, if she gets the upper hand in the situation, that somehow makes it all right that she was two-dimensional. And I think
mm.
even that sometimes it's like like that to the author you're talking about, her point, I think, is that like, it doesn't make it okay that you wrote her two-dimensional because she won in the end, or she got the upper hand, or that the other character, lost out to her. There still needs to be more there.
Yeah, yeah. Because I guess like that's the same with like that's the same with these kind of like what you've been talking with John, like
Yeah.
the erotic thrillers,
Right. Yes. Yeah.
because sometimes they're written that way, the kind of
Yeah.
femme fatale characters, and even sometimes a femme fatale wins,
Yeah.
but there's often at times they're written kind of two-dimensionally, and you're like, yeah, but you're still it's still being written in that kind of you know um it's still being written in that kind of way that
Yeah.
like that like male writers often write kind of female characters, that there's like the Madonna whore complex where it's like
Right.
they're
Yeah.
either like a flawless angel, or they are a flawless mother angel, whatever, or they are like evil vixen,
Yeah.
femme fatale, whatever, and it's like, well.
Right, right. Well, and the one thing I think about the erotic thrillers is that they get written that way. And then it's a question of how does the director work with the material, but then also the actors involved. I think of like
Mm,
like Mirror Images is one that series that deals directly with that idea because it's like the actor, either it's Delia Shepard in the first one or Shannon Worry in the second one, where she's playing two characters. She's playing twin sisters, where one is that, the Madonna kind of, the the perfect wife character, but she's kind of boring to the husband. Like he wants this like real alluring life, and then the other one is the one who's living the more promiscuous and dangerous lifestyle. And I think that's one of the things like the actor sometimes, like Shannon Worry, for example, in Mirror Images too, she really plays those characters so well that she can
mm,
flesh them out. And I think that's the problem with a book versus a movie is that to your point about the whole collaborative process is that you could have a movie that starts off with two-dimensional female characters that then the actors can really flesh out and make something more out of, and then the director can go with it and say, yes, keep doing this, keep bringing and sometimes it changes the whole perspective of a movie where you're watching a movie that should be kind of like from the male point of view that suddenly becomes something different. But from a novel, that's it. When novel's written,
yeah,
the
that's
reader
true.
can put some parts of it, but everything's kind of set in stone on the page. Whereas a movie is so much more dynamic. So I guess to your point, right, about like it being a dynamic or a collaborative process, that like if one piece of it is something that makes us uncomfortable and we don't like that person, does it, do we hurt the other people that were involved who maybe didn't even know that person was that bad and gave a great performance? It's a real, yeah, it's an interesting question.
So it's a real balancing act, and like does make me think of like yeah, I mean that can add like so much to a movie. I mean like um uh, the newest episode, the episode that will come out, it's not come out yet, but it will come out before this podcast comes out. Newest episode of the Peck and Pa podcast I was doing was Straw Dogs, and
Yeah.
like the character, I mean like mostly. You get like the Dustin Hoffman perspective in that movie. He's kind of the central character in that movie. Um, but then on the page, I'm not sure that Susan George's character is as good as it is in the movie because, like, Susan George adds an extra dimension, and Susan George's performance is A plus plus. You know, she really brings a lot to that character, and like really makes you empathize with that character, and really makes you realize that that character is like the only good character in the movie, as in like only good person. Like you know,
Right, right.
like you know, but yeah, so it can really add like an extra dimension to a script that maybe doesn't um have the most three-dimensional character for like a female role.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, maybe that's, kind of, coming back here with the Seagal movies, I think this
Hmm.
is an area where, because he had so much say over how these movies went, that I think for, I mean, we have Imelda Staunton in one of these. I always tell people this, especially people from the UK who are on my podcast when they're talking about I'm on their podcast. And I mentioned that Imelda Staunton was in a Seagal movie. They just can't believe it. But, I think, she probably came from that school that, the Christopher Lee, Michael Caine school of, you know, sure, you can do a bad movie, but don't be bad in it. That idea of like, you can
Yeah,
sort of
yeah, yeah.
elevate the material. And I feel like she probably went into that thinking like, I'm going to elevate this, I'm going to make my scenes great. And then she gets on set and she's acting opposite a double. And she's like, I'm not even acting the scenes with him. It's a fascinating thing where there's like you said, it's a collaborative process, but sometimes you can have that one person weighing it down. And
Mm.
and Seagal is often that anchor that is, he's the reason that the movie gets the funding, but he's also the reason why a lot of these don't come out that good either.
Yeah, because he's constantly trying to fiddle with things. He's constantly trying to get in everybody's way. He thinks he knows what's best
Right.
in kind of all ways. You know, like he thinks he knows what's best with the acting. He thinks he knows what's best with the stunt direction. He thinks he knows what's best with the direction. He thinks he knows what's best with the script, because he's always trying to fiddle with the script. He's always bugging directors, butting heads with directors. He's always, obviously we've talked a lot about his history of kind of roughing up stuntmen unnecessarily. Because like, stunt fighting is much in the same realm as like professional wrestling. The magic of it, at its peak, what it's supposed to be is it's supposed to look like it really hurts while it not really hurting. Like that's that's
Right.
it. That's what it's supposed to be. That's supposed to be like, the apex of that art in stunt fighting, just like in professional wrestling. The people who are seen as the best are the people who make it look the most real while also not hurting their opponent. Whereas like Seagal makes it look real by just beating people up unnecessarily.
Right. Well, yeah, because that's interesting. Think about part of the fall of the WCW was that Bill Goldberg was so reckless as a wrestler that he was injuring a lot of, like I think he gave Bret the Hitman Hart a concussion with a
He did
sidekick.
give
Yeah,
he did give Bret the Hitman Hart a concussion, which Hitman Hart will talk about at any available opportunity. And
exactly.
that's no offense to Hitman Hart. I love Bret the Hitman Hart. He is Canada's greatest man, Canada's greatest man. God bless him and and all that he has given us. But but he is a bitter, bitter man who really knows how to hold a grudge, but in like just the funniest way. Like and like unlike Seagal, who's like arrogant in all directions, like he thinks he's the best at everything. Like Bret the Hitman Hart is not. He doesn't think that. He's like arrogant in a very specific way. He's like if you're like said to Bret the Hitman Hart, are you the most intelligent man in the world? Like Brett would be like, no, no. He would come across as like a kind of modest Canadian. But If you suggested anybody else was the greatest professional wrestler, he would lose his freaking mind and tell you in great detail how basically all of his matches were like at least 75% him. And like, that's what made them all great. And he is very much the best there is, the best there was, and the best there ever will be. He believes that to his very core.
Yeah.
And don't you ever doubt him. So like, so he's just arrogant in this very specific way.
Right, right. No, that's a good point because you see him on things like A&E did a documentary back when he was like kind of winding down his career, but it kind of went over a bunch of things. Like it went over his exit from WWF and WWE, where
Hmm.
he thought he was going to get there was going to be a double disqualification in Montreal. And he would
Yeah,
go
yeah,
and lose his belt somewhere else. He didn't want to lose it in Canada. And, Vince
yeah.
McMahon, worked with like Mike Hevner, the ref, and Shawn Michaels to put him in like, kind of, essentially the moment he got put into a submission hold, he was out, right? It was like, and I guess like
Yeah.
you could hear on the microphone, like he decked Vince McMahon. He, punched him as a, but like you're hearing this whole thing and you're just like, yeah, this guy is really believable. Like, like it all sound like you said, he sounds humble. He sounds like, he's just a regular Canadian guy who's just, trying to get along and do his thing. But you're right. Like when you start to break down what he says about him as a wrestler, yeah, you realize that's like, yeah, he was like, the only reason why he's not the greatest ever is because these moments happened where he got injured or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, like, and yeah, he's like a funny guy. He like, I mean, like, as much as I was totally on his side in the Montreal screw job, he has been talking about it for nearly 30 years now, and you're like, come on, Brett, you can let it go. It's okay. Everybody's, most people were on your side. Um, you know, like, uh, um, but like. I, but he can't let a grudge he can't let a grudge go. Um, although I will say though there is a famous, I don't know what it was for, but there's like a famous like promo photo of Brett, and in the background of the photo it's like this forest and these like snow-capped mountains in the background, and in the foreground it's Brett dressed in double denim, with denim jacket and denim jeans with his
The
Bret
tux
Hitman Hart shades, and it's the most Canadian photo I've ever seen.
is so great.
Like,
Yeah, the good old Canadian tuxedo, as they say. Yes, the denim. That's beautiful. Yeah, he is. Yeah, it's such a joy. I mean, to your point about him like not letting it go, it's like with all the stuff that's come out about Vince McMahon, like Bret the Hitman Hart's thing, it's still bad, right? What Vince did there
yeah,
in Montreal, it's bad, but it's like kind of down the list now of like all the horrible things that Vince McMahon has done. I mean, Jesse the Body's probably got even a bigger gripe, even though his is more with Hulk Hogan than it is with Vince McMahon because Hogan sold out the union. But
yeah, I mean,
still,
but I mean, it's still with Vince because like it
yeah,
was Vince who, in the end, did the union busting. It wasn't
right,
like
right.
Hogan might have been the snitch, but like Vince himself did the union bust. No, I mean, like Vince is one of history's greatest monsters. Let's not make no bones about that. Obviously, he has a litany of predatory behavior towards women. He is often treated his workers um, terribly. There is, I mean, whether it's conspiracy or not, um, like there's he might have helped somebody get away with murder, and I'm like, that's not a joke. Like
Right.
like
No, no,
it, it
right.
is
Yeah.
it, it is suspected that like Jimmy Snuka in the 80s murdered his girlfriend. He was never arrested for it. The investigation kind of went away, and it was a small town which the WWE often came through, and like there's a lot of conspiracy theories that Vince and the WWE put pressure on the sheriff department of that small town, and made the Jimmy Snuka case go away. Is that, and I have to say, Big A allegedly, obviously,
Right, right. Yeah, right.
it's never been concluded, it's never been confirmed. So allegedly, allegedly, but there's a
Yeah.
lot of scuttlebutt around that. But in terms of the things we actually know he did, he's done a whole litany of terrible things. And obviously, because sexual predators have got to stick together, obviously he's a big friend of your current president,
Yes.
Mr. Trump. So like,
Right.
so truly, Vince is, all round 360 degrees, just pure evil.
Yes. Well, and that friendship with Trump was what got his wife the uh, Department of Education head, or Secretary of
Yeah.
Education role, which is just, yeah. So as if the educational system in the United States needed to be dismantled any further. Yes, yeah. So yeah, that friendship paid off for Vince McMahon. I'm assuming him and Linda. I don't know if they're still legally married.
No,
I
I
don't. I
think
think they're
after I think they separated after the lawsuit, the Janelle Grant
right.
lawsuit, became which ousted him from being president of the WWE.
Yeah.
Um, I think they separated after that was filed against them.
Yeah.
Um, although, there's plenty of other accusations before that, but like that seemed to be the straw that broke the camel's back kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I think they're no longer together. Post that coming to light, I can't remember if that was 2020, 2020. No, no, 2021 maybe. Yeah, something
Yeah.
like that. I can't remember. A few years back. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Um,
But yeah, we're living in the world of idiocracy now that the
we
wife of
are.
the
We're very much are.
WWE
Yeah.
empire is the Department of or the Secretary of Education in the United States. It's like, yeah, it's just yeah. I mean, I guess I don't know if it
Yeah,
was worse when we had the billionaire
like
before,
we
but
very much are living in the world of idiocracy. I don't know when this episode will come out, but like in like mid-June, I think it's like June 14th.
yeah.
The UFC are hosting an event for Trump's 80th on the White House lawn,
Yes.
which like I used to watch the UFC a lot,
Me
but
too.
that does
Yeah.
feel very dystopian novel. Like that's insane. Like
Right.
that's that. What are we doing? Like
Oh,
this is like the last days of Rome or something. What this isn't this nuts.
it does. It does. It feels like that like, yeah, and you just don't know. Like, yeah, it's because, yeah, I think with Trump getting elected that second time, it's like
Mm.
all bets are off now. It's like the first time he didn't quite have the mandate, where like this new one, he's got the mandate, and it's like everybody who's involved with him is like part of, it's like just falling in line and just sort of getting their piece out of it. And so obviously Dana White, he's another big Trump supporter. So yeah, it's a fascinating thing, and of course also the UFC has a deal with Paramount, which of course is owned by the Ellisons, who are also friends with Trump. So yeah, it's a whole thing. It's
Yeah.
it's kind of crazy that Seagal is hanging out in Russia, because it seems like the country is like perfect for him to come back and just be,
It
like.
does kind of feel perfect for perfect for Seagal to come back, like because I mean obviously because like because like previously Seagal, with like the Anderson Silva thing, Seagal was like a VIP guest at USC, because like, the USC has to platform every terrible person apparently. I mean, I can't believe that like, and I know we've gone off on one a bit. We'll get back to the movie Urban Justice. I still remember what we're really talking about. But hold on to your seats for a second. Um, like. I can't remember if it was last year or the year before, but like while he was still under indictment in Romania, Andrew Tate was a VIP guest
Right.
at one of the UFC events. Like literally, the UFC will platform any terrible person. Are you
Yeah.
a new terrible person in the world of conspiracy theory or manosphere or fascism? Well, the UFC has got a VIP lounge just for you.
Right. They have found this thing, like, I remember we watching, when the UFC first became this version of the UFC in the late 2000s. It evolved from those like sort of one-off tournaments with, Royce
Mhm.
Gracie and Dan Severn. When it kind of became this thing now that it is, when it was first morphing into that, you had this whole host of characters who kind of ran the gamut of, politically, they were all kinds of different people politically. They came from all parts of the world, Brazil, George St. Pierre in Quebec. It was a very interesting thing, but I think there was always this undercurrent that people were starting to hear these stories like, well, Dana White doesn't pay the fighters well. Dana's, kind of, there were kind of all these things that were happening. And it did kind of, I wonder if as there was the unrest that was coming, that Dana White started kind of pushing it so it was like only his kind of people were involved, and he kind of pushed the whole thing so it became this thing that it is now. Because yeah, 20 years ago when the UFC was first becoming what it is, it didn't feel quite like this. Like you could watch an event and it didn't feel the same way.
No, it didn't feel quite as toxic, and I think like there was always like kind of problematic characters, and there was always I mean, it always had like a conservative leaning fan base or whatever,
Yeah.
but it didn't feel like it was as toxic as this. It didn't feel like it was deliberately setting itself up as like it's not for me, like
Right. Yeah.
like whatever. But then, particularly in the last like 6 years, even more so, like when, they have like a long-standing relationship with the UAE and doing
Yeah.
events in Abu Dhabi. But
Yeah.
during the lockdowns, when they did the Fight Island events, which again feels like one of those kind of surreal kind of like, is Dana White secretly M. Bison? Like what? Like, so like when you're like involved in like every terrible thing, like from sports washing to like, to vaccine conspiracies to,
Yeah.
like being like a kind of the official sport of MAGA and like, like it got like too much. It was like they were deliberately kind of being like, yeah, this is not for you. And I watched it for a long time. I watched it from
Yeah.
like the first season of The Ultimate Fighter in 2005 through to about 2020. So
Yeah.
so I watched it for a long time, and even pre 2005, I'd seen bits and pieces of the tournament, but like I started following it regularly, from like the first Ultimate Fighter season.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, and like and then, but I in the last 6 years, I've like barely. Barely watched it. But yeah, there was like a solid like 15 years where I barely missed a pay-per-view, but
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah. Same
yeah.
here. I had a bunch of friends that we would, pitch in and get the pay-per-views. That was like a common thing, like I remember I was living at my parents' house for one of them, and but my parents were going to the casino that they would go to, and they were, and so my friend showed up, and one of them, he didn't have any cash on him, but he had like lottery tickets that he'd won, like scratch tickets that he'd won. And I was like, well, my mom loves scratch tickets, so she'll be fine taking that for payment, for, her part of the, because it was the cable that was in their name when we were watching it. And so, but yeah, that was like a thing. Like, we just, because, if it was like $60 or $70, if you had, seven or eight people that would want to watch it, it would bring the price down. And I mean, even Dana White said that. He's like, the price is, yeah, it's high, but, you're watching with your buddies or whatever. But yeah, I don't remember the last one. I wouldn't even know any of the fighters. I mean, I think the last event that I'd heard about was actually kind of ironically, it was the Gina Carano,
Oh yeah,
Ronda
yeah, the one
Rousey.
that was last well, from time of recording last weekend, the Ronda Rousey
Yeah,
and Gina Carano one. Yeah, no, that's the same. There's probably a lot of fighters I don't know now. And also, I think like another one of the big breaking points was like it was like, okay, so a lot of the American fighters are like very pro MAGA or whatever, but I was like, well, I don't know the political leanings of like the other fighters, so I can still root for them. But then when there was like the attempted fascist insurrection in Brazil, and then like Jair Bolsonaro like ran away when that failed, and then he hid in former UFC champion Jose Aldo's house, like for a
right,
little bit.
right.
And I was like, and then I found out a bunch of the Brazilian fighters were like pro Bolsonaro or whatever,
Yeah,
which is kind of the Brazilian Trump. And I was like, fuck me. Is
yes.
anybody good in the UFC? Like, who can I support now?
I know, I know. It's one of those things. I mean, a lot of it too with action stars, you kind of have to hold your nose to, because a lot of them, it's
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah. It's the
I remember,
same. It's the same thing. It's the same thing. I
yeah,
guess again, we're circling back to like just separating. Like
yeah,
like you say, a lot of the we're of a liberal bent, and like action movies generally have a more conservative leaning audience, and lots of the action stars are more conservative leaning and like, but I think there is a difference. I think there is, there's different types. Like I think that like you know, I mean, you can get like a conservative like Stallone who's calling
Yeah.
Trump like the new George Washington or whatever.
Right.
Um, but then you can get a conservative like, Arnie, who I'm more on
Right.
board with because Arnie is just like he's just like really fiscally conservative, which
Yeah.
I'm against,
Yeah.
but like socially he's pretty liberal, he's pro kind of LGBT rights and like, like he's pretty liberal dude, like socially and he's an anti-Trumper as well. So like, like and I might be against his kind of like his fiscal thoughts. He's obviously very pro that kind of like deregulation Reaganite
Yeah.
thinking, which I find abhorrent. But at least like he's not a fascist, which is
Right.
like the low bar that the action stars now need to pass of being like, okay, I can still be like very pro you. You're just like very fiscally conservative, which I'm against ideologically, but
Yeah.
I don't hate you because you're not supporting, white nationalism or, like establishing like a kind of theocratic Christian nationalism or whatever. You're not an active neo-Nazi, which is now the low bar that action stars need to pass for me.
Right, exactly, exactly. Yeah, it's crazy that that's the other place that we're at. It's like like looking at like Gina Carano this weekend. She should. Yeah, I mean, you'd think like the Mandalorian movie comes out the same weekend or a weekend
Mm,
after her kind of this fight that she's doing with Ronda Rousey, where like neither of them are relevant anymore. They're completely done,
mm.
and it's like she was on what was probably the number one Disney Plus show, for 2 seasons. And I imagine they would have had her in the third season. I wonder if part of the reason why they moved to Katie Sackhoff's character more in the third season was because they didn't have Carano. And
Yeah, and like I think like she really shot herself in the foot there because yeah, Ronda Rousey beat her in like 17 seconds. So Ronda Rousey, the superior fighter, but the inferior actress.
right.
Like because like the thing about Gina Carano and the thing that I think like upset a lot of people, like you can have your opinions. You can be conservative, you can be whatever. And I'm not going to like turn against you or whatever for just being that. Even voting Trump, like I don't hate Vince Vaughn. He's obviously very conservative. He seems like he's like a Trump guy. He's like a gun rights guy, but like I don't hate him. I don't hate Kelsey Grammer, even though he seems a bit mental. And again, bit of a gun nut and very pro-Trump or whatever. But anyway, I don't hate them. But like the way, and like Gina Carano kind of moaning about being cancelled, but like, to compare vaccine mandates, to compare like her being like anti-vax to like a Holocaust,
Yeah,
somebody in the Holocaust, like that's truly outrageous. That is truly
yeah,
something that, that you can't come back from. And
yeah,
like, and I think, yeah, she did. Yeah, she really shot herself in the foot, and she only has herself to blame. And like, previously, I had enjoyed her in Haywire. I
yeah.
had enjoyed her in when she was in the Fast and Furious. Whatever. She's pretty good. She was good in The Mandalorian, but fuck her. Like,
Exactly.
like I
No,
like, I
exactly.
mean, like you can't
Yeah,
make a statement like that.
yeah.
That's abhorrent. Like
No.
that's, and I think like, like this thing of like, oh, you just call everybody you don't like a Nazi. Well, no. Like I said, there's lots of conservatives who I still watch, who I still, like I might not like their politics, I might not like, what they say, a lot of the things they say, but I still can enjoy them. But there's lines, I mean, like, and that's like casting a massive line, to compare yourself to a victim of the Holocaust, when you are a privileged, wealthy actress, who's, being minorly inconvenienced by vaccine mandates. I mean, ugh,
Yeah.
I just can't.
No. Oh, and, she had been doing stuff before that, like she was making fun of pronouns and things like that.
Yeah,
She's
yeah, she did a
anti-trans.
lot of the trans stuff. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
which seems like to be like a very kind of popular thing on the right. It just like the kind of like the pronoun stuff and like last tangent, we'll definitely go back to well, we'll definitely back
Oh,
to urban
sorry.
justice after this, okay? Last tangent. I do think it's hilarious and hypocritical that like Dave Chappelle is like he was interviewed recently and he's like kind of complaining that the Republicans and the right have kind of weaponized his jokes and made them something more vicious than they were intended to be, his trans jokes. And I'm just like, come on, Dave.
Yeah, I know.
Come, like you can't. I mean, really, I used to admire your man, but like this is ridiculous. You can't be like I mean, they didn't take much weaponizing. I mean, like it's not like they were taken rapidly, massively out of context. They were just kind of you've just been, copy paste, kind of like and then with slightly more added vitriol, like you've really done this to yourself, Dave, like
Yeah.
capturing this particular fan base and capturing this particular audience, like just front up to it, just
Yeah.
uh yeah.
Yeah, I'll say quickly on that too, because I think one of the things about comedians is that comedians do not like being criticized, which is
Mm,
weird, right? Because you're going on stage and you're going to get booed or laughed, you're going to get laughter or you're going to
mm,
get crickets or whatever. But like you kind of want to hone your craft or whatever. But there's this idea that like if people say that like, hey, that joke went too far, or you shouldn't have made that joke, that like somehow they don't want to. I don't know. There's something about that. I mean, Bill Maher has made a whole career on that of like, being angry that people are telling him like you shouldn't have made that joke. It's not, and it's such a weird thing that like instead of saying like for example, Dave Chappelle saying like, okay, maybe I shouldn't have made those initial trans jokes I made. Like maybe I shouldn't have said that, and I won't make any more trans jokes. He's doubling down. And then he's like, "Oh, well, why is it that my only fans are conservative right wingers that have like embraced me now? Like, what happened there?" It's like, well, because you doubled down, like you didn't need to double
mhm.
down. You could have just said, "You know what? I was wrong. I shouldn't have made those jokes." Or even just, he didn't even necessarily, he was wrong. I mean, it would have been better if he said he was wrong, but he could have just not doubled down. He could have just have never made those jokes and it would have
Yeah,
been, yeah,
you could just not double down. You can
right.
just
Yeah,
there's it's like all these people that like Dave Chappelle, like Ricky Gervais,
yeah,
whatever, they just like doubling and tripling down.
yeah,
You could just you have an option. Like it's not like that's your only option,
right,
doubling down. There's other comedians um I don't know if you'd be aware because like it's a British comedian, like Scottish, but like there's a comedian like Frankie Boyle, whose like material has evolved, and he did like a lot of things, very edgy, very dark material, some of which he stands by, some of which he doesn't. To use a more American example for your mainly American audience, I assume, like somebody like Sarah Silverman, she did like a lot of edgy, ironic racial humor which she says she wouldn't do now. And some again, some of the jokes she stand by, and like she does make the defense that like what she was doing was deliberately ironic, and she tried to frame it deliberately ironically, but she realized that like a lot of that kind of humor that was very popular in the early mid 2000s, which was like it's all right to be sexist and homophobic and racist as long as you're ironic, and then we kind of realized that not everybody was being as ironic as they were claiming to be,
yeah,
and it became like a much more complicated thing because because back then we all laughed because we were like, well, we're all on the same side and we all
yeah,
understand that this is bad, but we're making fun of it being bad, kind of thing.
yeah,
Um, and then realized that maybe that wasn't as much of a case as we thought it was. And some comedians like Sarah Silverman have like evolved and gone on and been like, I stand by some of that stuff. And even somebody like Mark Maron, who's kind of become like a kind of figurehead of like woke comedy or whatever. He did like a lot of kind of edgy stuff in the early mid 2000s or whatever, which again, some of it he sticks by, some of it he's like, yeah, probably I took some swings that you know, that probably haven't aged well. And like, so you can front up to it. You can be like Mark Maron, you can be like Sarah Silverman, you can front up to it and be like, yeah, okay, yeah, I took a swing there. I thought I was doing something. I thought I was clear to the audience that it was ironic or whatever. But then maybe it just came across as opinion. And yeah, and move on. and like maybe you lose some of your audience, but Sarah Silverman and Mark Maron still have quite big audiences, so still quite a lot of people will be like, okay, cool, yeah, you funnied up.
Yeah, I agree for sure there because I think especially like Mark Maron in particular. I mean, he was someone who, I guess Sarah Silverman too. They came up in those early days of Comedy Central in the 90s into into the early 2000s, and they were doing things like obviously the roasts are in the news right now because of the Kevin Hart roast, but
Mm.
Comedy Central first got the roasts from the Friars Club in the late 90s, early 2000s. And they used it as a forum for up and coming comedians for them. And so, to that point, roasts were all people that knew each other. That Friars Club dais in the 70s, those were all people that knew each other. And so when they were roasting each other, it was more like a, I don't want you to get too big, kind of thing. Whereas, in the late 90s, early 2000s, it became these up and coming comedians just sort of taking shots at somebody that they didn't even know. That's why the Chevy Chase, when you see him with his sunglasses, just sitting there angry the whole time. Apparently, like when he got on set, he was just like, I don't know any of these comedians. What's going on here? He was expecting his friends to be roasting him. I mean, maybe he also didn't have a lot of friends. I don't know. But it was that idea. And Mark Maron was one of those comedians. And when you're doing those roasts where you're targeting somebody, you say all kinds of things. And I'm sure there's like some of those that he wished he had back, or like you said, there's certain bits that he did at the time that, now he's like, okay, that we don't do those kind of bits anymore. And, I think it's easy enough to say like, okay, comedy doesn't always, things change over time. And, we look at things differently now than we did. And it's okay to say like, yeah, these jokes, it's not about being overly PC or woke or whatever. It's just saying we're in a different time now. We have different sensibilities, and this is what we're, this is what we're going to do. This is what the comedy is going to look like. Yeah, so I guess what getting back to the movie, one thing I guess I don't know with Urban Menace is that because it's not as bad as the other ones we've talked about, I wonder if it lends itself more easily. I mean, obviously we go on tangents, a fair amount when we do these Seagal movies, but I wonder if this one lends itself more to that because there's like it's kind of like once you get through that first fight where he fights in front of the McDonald's, it's mostly just him trying to piece together information, and then just like going places and throwing people through shelves and books and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, like the plot is as basic as it can get. Yeah, it's his investigation. We know from pretty early on that because Max is taking photos, so we know from pretty early on Shaw is like dodgy or whatever. And and the way the actor acts it, it's very clear that even if we weren't aware, it's very clear that he's like a dirty cop from very early on. Um, yeah, and then like you say, it's him like following the investigation, trying to figure out who killed his son, and so we just thought, well, like the two main things is happening is we're either following him investigating and kind of beating people up for information, or we are like the other thing that's happening is our man, head of the East Side Gangsters, has put a hit out on him, and there's various attempts on Simon's life throughout the movie. A couple of them by Isaiah, the brother of the informant Gary, or Gary Morrison, like to
Right,
give him
which is a
his
great
full
name.
name,
Yes, Gary Morrison.
everybody needs to give their Simon Ballister, Max Ballister, Frank Shaw. Everybody again needs to have their full name stated. But yes, so there's various attempts in his life, and then obviously, um, Seagal as Simon Ballister manages to kind of knock them back pretty easily. Um, but yeah, and that's pretty much like the whole movie. And then the other thing in the movie is that the Shaw character and Eddie Griffin's our man character are trying to do some like big drug deal, and there's a kind of little bit of a subplot where they they take a hit out on like another drug deal that's going down with some other gangsters who are not the Danny Trejo lot, and our man's lot, but some other ones who we're not really fully introduced to. But they're taken out, they steal their drugs, they steal their money, and then they're trying to do like a big deal with this big New York gangster, and it seems like the guy who comes to like collect the drugs at the end of the movie, even though he's dressed like Kingpin or whatever, like the suggestion from the dialogue is he's not the big cheese. He's like maybe second or third in command in the New York operation, and it seems like the New York operation is like a bigger, like some sort of bigger gang, like some sort of almost like mafia type kind of more kind of like higher level organized crime instead of like kind of low level kind of street gang kind of types. So yeah, I guess there's that. There's the kind of we get to the big drug deal, and but yeah, I mean like other than that, I mean it's very straightforward plotting, very straightforward plotting. So there's not a lot to explain in those sorts of terms.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, like, one of the things that Seagal does is he finds out where they're keeping those drugs they stole from the one group that they're trying to sell
Hmm.
to the other group, and he replaces them all with baking soda. Now, what he
Yeah,
does with that heroin or the drug or the cocaine or whatever it was, we
I
don't
think it was
know.
cocaine.
It was cocaine, right? I think it's what, yeah. And
Yeah.
we don't know. He just did the swap. It's like so one of the things about this one's from '07, and it is
Hmm.
one of the last movies where he gets shot in a situation. And
That's
it's a
true.
fascinating way that he gets shot. So essentially, there's one time that these guys, Eddie Griffith and company, they plan a hit on him, and he's hanging out with Carmen Serrano, talking with her about stuff, and then the hit comes, and he's like, just stay behind me and stay low. And you see him throughout most of this situation using high-level military tactics to pick off these gangsters who don't shoot well, right? They kind of come in and normally in a movie like this, you're like, okay, yes, the black or brown characters aren't able to shoot the white guy, right? And there's just no way they can hit them. But at least
Hmm.
here, they're shooting with their guns sideways. They're not really aiming well. And
Hmm.
and so
Hmm.
it makes it kind of more believable that someone with a little bit of military training could get,
Hmm.
advantageous positions and pick them off. So he's doing this all really well for the most part. Like he's, finding great places for cover. He's getting, he's got the high ground in circumstances. But then for some reason he just walks out into an open area and where he's surrounded by them and they just start shooting him. And it's like, what, again, like why, you've got this great military training and you seem to be using it really well. Why would you just walk out in the middle there and just let yourself get
Yeah.
shot? So that doesn't make any sense. But then he's on the ground, he's bleeding out, and Carmen's like, "Oh, the police are coming." And we think that like maybe he gets picked up by the police and he gets taken to a hospital. But no, somehow she carried this like what is he, like 6'1", 250, but maybe closer to 300-pound man. Somehow
Hmm.
she's able to carry him out of
Hmm.
there and take him to her cousin who works as a nurse, as an ER nurse, and he
Yeah,
patches
I think a
Seagal
lot
up.
of action stars exaggerate their height, but I do think, as far as I remember, Seagal I think is a fairly legitimate kind of like 6'4" or
Oh,
something.
he's even taller than
Um,
that. Yeah.
yeah, I think he is quite tall. I think he is
Yeah.
quite tall.
I,
Um, like much taller than your average action star. Uh,
Well, I was gonna
uh,
say because you see it in that end fight scene that he has with the main baddie, which again the actor's name, the guy from Bo versus Python, Kirk B.R. Waller. But
yeah,
you see it in that
Kirk
because
B.
it's
R.
like
War.
that, even if Seagal knows all these martial arts, right, and he can, it's like he doesn't really need any martial arts to beat up this guy at the end because the guy's like half his size, and you can see the difference in the two of them. I mean, Seagal's just that much bigger. Um, but
Yeah,
yeah,
no, like well, he's listed as 6'4" anyway. So
wow,
I mean,
okay.
um, so 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 yeah, I think but like you say, like he's yeah, he could be 6'4", 250 pounds kind of thing. So like it's impressive that I mean I don't know, we don't know what happened because like we see him wake up and at this her cousin's flat,
Yeah.
So we don't know if like maybe she's managed to drag him as far as an alleyway and then managed to phone her cousin
Yeah.
on one of the many very 2007 flip phones that are on in
Right.
this film.
Right.
Um, like, and then they both carried him to the flat. So we don't know actually what happened there.
Yeah.
But yes, even like just dragging him into like a nearby alleyway would have been quite some effort for this woman who's not not a particularly tall or big woman herself, like a pretty fairly skinny person. So it would have been quite some going. But she did it. Also, I did think in that scene, she seemed to shoot pretty well too. I mean, she didn't like manage to actually get Armand or anything, but in terms of the way she was holding the gun, it looked like it wasn't the first time she had shot something. Um,
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Which is another thing that happens in these movies that
yeah,
characters, hold,
have
are able to
run.
hold guns and shoot people. A lot of times there's like weird explanations like, oh, my dad was a cop, which, my dad was a
Oh yeah,
bricklayer
yeah,
and I couldn't build a chimney. So I don't know, I couldn't mix cement. Maybe that's maybe the equivalent to shooting a gun is
yeah.
mixing
That that
cement,
that's
you know?
That's true. That's true. It was a bit like my dad. My dad, his dad was an engineer, but he's like, but dad has no like technical ability. He's an accountant. Like,
Exactly. Yeah.
it's not like, yeah, no, it is funny how like films present it as if it's like in just directly pumped into your DNA of just being like, oh, okay,
Right.
because your dad or whatever's in the military, you know how to shoot also. It's like, well, that's not how that works at all. Um,
No.
but but anyway, I do think like one thing we should discuss, I guess, because like I think this is like an interesting wrinkle, is like in the when he is taken to the apartment with the cousin with the male nurse who patches him up, um, like Seagal is like explaining his plan for revenge. And then Alice is a bit mortified, obviously thinking he was like more noble. He was more, wanting to take out these gangsters to rid of the criminal element or whatever, while also avenging his son. She then the blinkers are taken off her eyes, and she's like, "Oh, this is just pure revenge. This is all this is." And then she says, "Oh, you're just as bad as they are," and he goes, "No, I'm worse." And I think that's really interesting because, like, up until this point, like Seagal generally hasn't played like anti-heroes that much, and even the kind of heroes that are a bit more kind of anti-hero, they're still presented as like anti-hero with a kind of code, so they're still with like that kind of classic kind of samurai trope, of
Yeah.
like, kind of like the kind of the like the kind of shogun assassin thing or something, like that kind of like they still follow their own code or whatever. They're not just savages. Um, um, Whereas this like paints him in more he's more ruthless. And like, and again where in previous films he would have been presented as the White Knight who, protected all the women and kids in the movie. He's not presented like that at all, and I think this is a kind of major turning point in how Seagal is presented on screen. Because up until this point, he had mainly been the the noble the noble guy who is very protective of women and children, who is one with nature, who speaks to all the animals, who like that kind of thing. Like he is the shamanic medicine man, like whatever. Like whereas now this is like a kind of more down and dirty character, and he would start playing more of these post this film. But I think this is kind of very early on in that transition of him playing more kind of burnout characters.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. It's I mean, the closest thing we get to that is when he calls Liesl Karstens, who we saw in The Keeper. She had a much bigger
Hmm.
role in The Keeper, but she is
Bigger,
the
yeah, yeah, okay.
yeah,
Because
she's
she's
the
the one being protected. She is the one to he's hired to be the bodyguard of in the
yeah,
keeper. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, in this case, she's the widow of his son.
Hmm.
So he calls her to find out if she has anything that could be of use. And she's like, well, though the
Hmm.
police took it all. So he's like, okay, that's a dead end. And he's like, hey, if you need anything, I'm around, talk to you later, babe, or whatever. But like that's like the closest of to that kind of Seagal. And I think
Hmm.
it felt like it was setting up like that with the Carmen Serrano character. I think we felt like we were getting that. We get that moment in the apartment that gets interrupted by Armand and his crew coming to
And
take
it's
them
great
out.
because we think we're yes, it does seem like we're building towards him being kind of like that White Knight character that we're usually seeing him presented as, and it does seem like we're building towards like a romance with the Alice character, but that is entirely broken in this flat scene. And like we don't see the Alice character again. Like
Right.
she's like out in the movie, like and
Right.
like so the romance that we thought we were getting, the kind of like the classic kind of like Seagal's character is going to have to protect this woman at some stage from the gangsters, and she's going to like woo all over him, like which is
Right.
what usually
The awkward
happens in
hug.
these movies, with the awkward quote unquote sexy hug, like yeah, that never arrives, and like and she she completely goes off the character in that moment, and then she's out in the movie.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it's interesting because, we think about the Seagal bingo card and the things that come up.
Mm,
That's one that kind of doesn't there. Now, one that does also, in only a very small way compared to other movies, is he speaks a little bit of Spanish to
mm-hmm,
the Mexican
mm-hmm,
gangsters, but it's a very little bit. It's not, and it gives a sense that maybe he speaks Spanish fluently, but also maybe gives the sense that he just knows a few words and he can say them. So again, this whole idea of Seagal as the polyglot, we don't really get
mm,
that either in this, where it's like, oh, here's a Korean, food truck owner, and I'm going to speak fluent Korean with that food truck owner, or as a Thai, restaurateur or something, and I'll talk fluent Thai with them. There's none of that in here. There's just a couple moments where he speaks a little bit of Spanish to the people, the two guys that attack him, out in front of the car. I think he says a couple things in Spanish to them, but otherwise, we don't get that polyglot Seagal.
No, we don't get the polyglot thing. No, like you say, usually there is like a showcase moment where he
Right.
talks to a character who speaks another language, whether it be Japanese or Thai or Vietnamese, Korean, or later on it would become Russian or
Yeah.
or Spanish. We've seen that previously. I think he speaks French in one of the movies. I can't, but like usually there's like a showcase moment where like he talks to a character who has another language and has like a little bit of a conversation, and it's like this big show-offy moment of like I know how to speak all these other languages, but like you say, the way it's presented in this movie is totally different. And you don't get a sense that necessarily he speaks Spanish. It could just be that he is a guy who's lived in a few kind of Hispanic neighborhoods and has picked up some phrases. Like there's no suggestion of anything beyond that. There's no like big showcase moment where he's like, usually in this type of movie, like his meeting with Danny Trejo would have been entirely in Spanish, for example, and that would be the showcase moment of like, oh, I can speak this fluently. Whereas no, here, you could easily be, think that he's just a guy who's lived in a few Hispanic neighborhoods and picked up some words. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing. And I mean, the other thing too, of course, is his character. It We get the sense that maybe he was former CIA, um, but there was never that moment where, like, for example, other movies would have a moment with Shaw, the detective, who would be like on
Hmm.
the phone with somebody. And so maybe you'd have somebody in another office somewhere, and there'd be a dossier, and there'd be this picture
Hmm.
of Seagal as, Ballister, and they'd be like, oh, he was the best of the best. Oh, he was, and all these kinds, and they'd have this big conversation about how great Seagal was, and that never happens in this movie either. They never try to
That's
figure out who
true.
he
The
is.
big yeah, like you say, normally you would get like a big info dump moment where we find his like dossier file of his special forces record or his CIA record or whatever, and then you know, um, yeah, and then somebody would read out a bunch of statistics of being like, oh my God, he's killed 30,000 people and has won five Purple Hearts, and like,
Right, right, exactly.
and you'd be like, all right, okay, fine, right, okay, jeez, so yeah, but yeah, like you say, we don't get that moment either. I mean, like, yeah, we get a bunch of like kind of ego boosting moments where, you know, two henchmen run into, our man's apartment and or no, it's his office, and kind of say like, oh no, this guy, this big white dude, he like beat us all up, and our man's like, oh, what, just one white dude, like beat you all up, and so there's that. So there's yeah, and then there's the end moment as well where Eddie Griffin goes, "That's one cool motherfucker. That's some gangster shit."
Yeah.
And which I do feel like Seagal probably felt that there wasn't enough ego boosting moments in the film. There is a few where people are like, "Wow, how did this guy take out one guy take out all these guys?" And there's like there is that classic kind of like things that villains do where you can hear people are being taken out on the outside of the drug deal, and then the villains just kind of turn around to each other and go, Ballister, like
Right, exactly.
which is a classic action movie moment where
Right.
I'd love to do that. I'd love to be a villain in an action movie, and I just have to grumpily say the hero's name,
Right.
as they're taking out all my guys, like, oh, Ballister.
Right, exactly.
Ugh.
I know. Well, because the other action line we get is
Yeah.
when Seagal is with Carmen Serrano and they're having their
Hmm.
moment, and then suddenly the baddies show up, and Seagal goes, "Oh, we got company," So we had
Yeah.
that trope line as well. But
Yeah.
I wonder, because we were talking about how this is a better one. This is like probably
Yeah.
right
It is a
after
better one.
Pistol Whipped. But yet, also all of these normal hallmarks of a Seagal movie aren't there. And it's kind of like maybe gives a sense of like, okay, if Seagal doesn't have a lot of say in the movie, and if the movie, excuse me, doesn't hit these bad tropes that like we think of, it actually can be a not bad movie. If you don't have to have all these moments, it's like the Seagal polyglot moment is so ridiculous. And probably also lends to us, going on the big tangents that we've gone on in this episode, is that
Yeah.
normally that's
Yeah.
like one of the first things we would point to. It's like, oh, there was the polyglot moment, or there was the info dump moment,
Mm.
like, and we don't have those moments in this movie, and the movie actually isn't that bad as a result.
Yeah, and I mean, like you say, and as well as the polyglot and the infogot dump moments, like we were kind of talking about as well. Like you get these like kind of like famous kind of White Knight moments, whether that is White Knight with one of the female characters, or whether that is him being like his many um kind of as many kind of cultural appropriation moments where he does something where he's like, "Oh, I'm one with the Native American people or the Inuit people, or or any kind of like native people, or the kind of moments with the kind of environmental stuff where we get suddenly a kind of strong environmental message, and how Seagal's character is one with nature and all that. So like." Yeah, so those kind of big white knight moments and even like the cultural appropriation that we do get, doesn't seem quite as hysterical as as some other films because like throughout the movie, Um, Seagal is dressed fairly anonymously. It's not like do-rag Seagal, it's not like you know what I mean? Like it's like,
A
he
Rockaware
does
shirt,
do
yeah.
yeah, yeah, he's not doing all that. We're just wearing kind of like generic kind of middle-aged dad clothes. Like
Right,
it's
right.
not there's nothing noticeable about that. And yes, he does do the black scent a couple of times. And yes, because he this is the way he views kind of urban movies, quote unquote. He does say motherfucker a lot, like he's Samuel L. Jackson. But like. But beyond that, which is still funny, it is still funny, like, listening to Sal Gal being like, motherfucker this, motherfucker that, like, like
Yes,
doing the
exactly.
whole, like, it is ridiculous. But
Yeah.
it's, again, it's not the kind of full blown ridiculousness of like, oh, he's, like you say, he's wearing the big shirt, he's got the do rag, he's pretending that he is like a mid 2000 rapper, like, you know,
Right.
um, so like, yeah, so it's like there is elements of ridiculousness, but yeah, it's not the full blown. There's not a lot of like ticks really on the classic Seagal bingo card, which you might think that it would end up being kind of um, less entertaining in some ways, but like it's not. And like this is one of the few movies, like apparently, obviously, reading about it seems like Seagal was a massive pain in the ass on set.
Right.
It
Yes.
seems like he was pretty awful to the director, who, let's be honest, I mean, like, Donnie Fauntleroy maybe has some things himself because he was the cinematographer on all three Jeepers Creepers. So, like, post conviction, so like, of the director of that film. So, like, I
Right.
don't know, he's made some
Right.
questionable choices too. But, yeah. So he seems like he was massive pain in the ass. But at least, we've got like a relatively committed Seagal. So like the at least the fight scenes don't seem as lazy. He seems like he's the and I genuinely hope that no stuntmen got hurt in the making of this movie. But at least the fights in the movie look a bit more convincing. It looks like he's putting conviction into the kind of things that he's doing. As much as I kind of mocked the front kick earlier, that front kick looks fucking brutal.
Yes.
And the way it's presented in the movie, where it seems like it's like a kind of video game power move where it's kicking people into shelves, it's kicking people through walls, it seems like kind of like a WWE special move or something, like and it looks pretty cool. It looks pretty cool, and this is 2007, so like, yes, he is a slightly bigger Seagal, but actually, in some ways, that kind of works for him because like he's not become kind of this laughable kind of fat Elvis figure that he become later. He actually looks fairly imposing with that weight. Um, and like, this is nearly 20 years ago. So the other thing that's good is, and this would deteriorate in later movies, he does still have that hand speed that does look cool on camera. And like, like, yes, he's a terrible person, he's a piece of shit, whatever. But like, those scenes do look impressive because like he's still got the hand speed that actually makes it look like it's, he's actually like, beating these guys up and roughing them up or whatever. So yeah, it strips out a lot of the kind of bad ticks, while also giving kind of the best of Seagal. And the best of Seagal is basically just his fighting style. That is what I think attracted audiences to him initially. It was just a fighting style that was like a bit more unique, because like not a lot of people had seen that. They were more used to karate or kung fu or judo or whatever or taekwondo. And yeah, so that was the point I was making. Yeah, I don't know.
No, and to your point too, like you said, the hand speed is there. He's engaged in the fights. There's not as much doubling. I mean, again, you watch that fight in Out for a Kill that he does with the guy doing the monkey style where he's running around and you can see the
Hmm.
double constantly in that fight scene.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
that's
Hmm.
not what you
Hmm.
get here. And I think too. I think to your point, we get a good amount of fight scenes as well. They're spaced out
Mm.
pretty well. It's like he seems to, just when you think the movie's going to kind of hit a lull point, some of the bad guys show up and he just starts throwing them through more bookshelves and, whatever. And like I said, I'm joking about him throwing people through bookshelves and coffee tables and things like that. But it's like kind of the fun Seagal slap chop, twisting arms and throwing people around kind of fights that you like in these movies. It's interesting though because again, to get this movie done, to your point, Seagal was really difficult on set. He had a rule, I guess, that he only wanted to be in the movie he would only shoot a few hours a day. And to get the pages that he was in done, they needed to do a lot more than that. And Fauntleroy had to try to keep him on set more, which again made him more ornery and caused issues with other cast members. But we get something that is like you said, I mean, it's a 2.5 star movie, but 2.5 star out of five on Letterboxd kind of movie. But for Seagal movies, if you can get over 2 stars, if you get to halfway to five for a Seagal DTV movie, you're doing pretty good. And so, yeah, it's one of those things that I guess this was a formula that there was no way that they could ever possibly repeat. But we got it for this movie.
Yeah, we got it through this movie, and I don't know what was happening with Seagal at this time because, like, yeah, we got this in 2007, then we got Pistol Whipped in 2008. Seems like he was maybe a bit more, and then even up until, you know, like '09 where we get where we get the keeper and driven to kill, which again he looks a bit more committed, and
Yeah.
then obviously it goes rapidly to I've not really delved into much of the 2010s, but like I know from clips and things I've seen it goes rapidly downhill very, very quickly. And even before this, it seems like he was kind of offended by the fact he was in the DTV realm, so didn't put in a lot of effort. But in this, we have this brief window of '07 to '09 where he seems a bit more committed and a bit there's a bit less stunt doubling, and who knows why that was the case. That he decided to commit to these DTV movies and be a bit more committed to them. I don't know, but yeah. So in this kind of '07 to '09 period, we get probably some of his best DTV stuff, and then yeah, and then he just re resets back to being even lazier than he was before.
Right. I think when you get 2009's A Dangerous Man, I think that's the second one he does with Keone Wax. So the first one, The Keeper that we did, that was I think the
Mm,
first one he did with Keone Waxman. And I think A
yeah,
Dangerous Man is the second one. And A
yeah,
Dangerous Man really starts to kind of fall into all of those things. And I don't know if because he does 10, I think he does like, is it not 10 movies? He does a lot of movies with Keone Waxman between, The
yeah. I think
Keeper.
it maybe is as much as 10. I
Could be
don't
that.
know. Like yeah, but yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and one of the things we've seen throughout this is that we had Fauntleroy, we had the Koish trilogy,
Course trilogy. Yeah.
right, we've had these directors who, a lot of times the directors are like one and done with Seagal, or
Mm,
they do like a group of them and then they never work with him again. Like Fauntleroy said, he never worked with Seagal, didn't want to, he was never going to work with him again after this movie. Um,
mm.
and there's something
Which is
about the
interesting because, like, obviously he's like, because he directed three and then he was
right,
cinematographer on another two. So, like,
right.
so he has five collaborations with Seagal.
Yeah, and he just this was it for him.
This is just,
Ke-
yeah.
I wonder if Keone Waxman, if there was something there where either the contract was so many movies, or I mean, I know he worked with like, for example, line producer Ben Sachs, who was on I Must Break This Podcast. I
Mm,
always talk about that interview that he did because he talked
mm,
about what it was like doing these Seagal movies. But I
mm,
wonder if maybe that was Keone Waxman liked working with him as a line producer and would put up with Seagal. There's
mm,
something there because there's this thing that happens where he works with Keone Waxman all this time. And I don't think Keone Waxman pushes back on Seagal in any
mm,
way. Like he doesn't. He kind of lets Seagal do what Seagal wants, and then he makes the movie around him. Uh,
mm,
and so of course we get these low quality movies that Keone Waxman period when we start getting into those more. The Keeper's the first one. But I mean, the next one after that, A Dangerous Man, when we start, when we start getting into that period, it's going to be
mm.
interesting. But I wonder if it was almost like the movie industry, the DTV movie world had given up on trying to get Seagal to make good, decent
Mm,
DTV movies, and they were just like,
yeah.
okay, you want to sit for the whole movie? That's fine. We've got Byron Mann or Brent Foster, somebody who'll do all the fighting scenes or something. Yeah,
Yeah, I think you're right. And then I think like, yeah, we can't like, yeah, I think at that point he's no longer committed at all, and I think we can't rely on getting anything really entertaining from Seagal. So then, yeah, I think like going forward for a lot of these, it's just we're going to have to rely on either like Seagal bingo card goofiness, or somebody else bringing something. Like for example, in A Dangerous Man, which is one I have seen.
yeah,
Um, I remember almost nothing Seagal does, but I do still remember that film because like Byron Mann's villain performance in that film
yeah,
is pretty entertaining. He's a pretty over the top, pretty kind of outlandish villain. So like so I think yeah, we really have to rely on somebody else bringing something to the table, like and often it is like a villain, like an entertaining villain character.
yeah.
Um, yeah.
Yeah, no, to your point, because so one of the things about Pistol Whipped, that we talk about as being kind of a better one, and that was directed by Roel Rene, who kind of does a slightly higher level of direct-to-video action. He's not
Hmm.
quite like Isaac Florentine or Jesse V. Johnson when Jesse V. Johnson's paying his producers are paying the crew for the movies, but you know what I mean? Like they're
Hmm.
like a slightly higher, but Roel Rene is kind of right below that crew. He's like kind of right in
Hmm.
that where he does pretty good stuff, and that's might be why Pistol Whip was a little bit better as well. Um,
Yeah.
but he starts
Also,
to.
Pistol Whipped has like I think like what what works in Pistol Whipped favor again, and I guess it's like what cast you can capture,
Yeah,
but it does have a tremendously entertaining performance by Lance Henriksen,
yeah.
who is doing a bunch of scenery chewing as Lance Henriksen is known to do, and God bless him for it.
Yes. Well, that's the same thing with Eddie Griffin here too, as well, is that, you know,
Yes, yes, yeah, yeah.
and I think that's part of it too, is that when you get these co-stars who work in the movie with Seagal, do they see it as again, like, the Michael Caine? I don't know if it was Michael Caine or Christopher Lee or Peter Cushing. One of them said that famous line of like, one of them I think told Michael Caine the key to doing a bad movie is to be good in it. I feel like it was either Peter
Hmm.
Cushing or Christopher Lee that told him
I
that.
think it might have been Christopher Lee.
Yeah,
I think you're right. I think it might
yeah,
have been Christopher Lee. But like, yeah, they do have that mentality. Although, like, Michael Caine is quoted as saying about On Deadly Ground that he made, like he made like a a classic mistake. He was like, usually if you know you're in a bad movie, at least make sure it's in a good location. But this was a bad movie in like tough conditions in Alaska,
right.
so like, at least when he was making Jaws the Revenge, he was in like Bermuda or wherever he was,
Right,
like
right.
I can't remember if it's Bermuda or the Bahamas, but like it's one of those. Think Bermuda.
Yeah,
So at least he gets a nice holiday out of it, like he's like
right.
and I think like that's what a lot of actors do. They're like, they read the script and then they're like, God, this script is dog shit. But then they hear the offer of the money and they're like, that is good money. And then they hear they're getting like a trip to Hawaii or something. They're like, yeah, all right, fine.
Yeah, right, right, exactly. I was thinking about like there's one Seagal did a DTV sequel to his movie. He had the movie Kill 'Em All, and then he did Kill 'Em All 2. And
Hmm.
Kill 'Em All 2 was filmed on the Adriatic coast in Italy.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
it's like, yeah, I don't, I would probably like I don't even know what kind of how low of a salary I would take to do a job where
Yeah,
I spent a week on the Adriatic coast in
yeah.
Italy. But I can imagine
Yeah.
that was probably an easy selling point for Van Damme to be like,
Yeah, I mean, absolutely,
yeah,
absolutely. If you're like, if if somebody, if like a producer comes to you, and it's like, I'm going to give you $500,000 for 7 days on this film, that's filming on the Adriatic coast, or whatever, and and we'll get the best Italian cake caterers or whatever, and you'd be like, okay, all right, yeah, fine, all right,
It's
I'll do
perfect.
it.
Exactly, exactly. And somehow they
They're
wind
like,
up a deal with
do you need
Netflix.
to read the script? No, I
No,
don't need to read the
right,
script. Fuck
exactly.
it. You're gonna pay for a week. You're gonna pay for a week on the
Yeah,
Adriatic coast and give me money on top of that.
yeah,
And I'm going to get free craft services from the finest Italian chefs. Ah, fuck it. I don't care what it
ex
is. Be any dog
exactly.
shit. I'm like,
Right, exactly. I wonder too. I wonder if, when we talked about Adrenaline Fear the Rush on your podcast, if it was a
yeah,
similar situation where, those actors are like in like this mud and muck and stuff in like this gross location the whole time, and Pyun's having
yeah.
them like roll around in it and all that stuff. If they were just like, oh, this was not the kind of bad movie that and I wonder too if maybe they told Natasha Henstridge like, yeah, we picked a bad movie here. Like we shouldn't have done this one.
Yeah, no, that's true. That's like yeah. Bad movie, bad location is because I mean they were running around kind of cave systems and stuff like that, and these old abandoned kind of factories, some of which I think were kind of unsafe and
Right,
had a
right.
whole bunch of asbestos in them or whatever, and like
Right.
like as yeah, no, I mean like. Poor Natasha Henstridge and Christopher Lambert actively, doing something actively detrimental to their health. Like it just, while also making a bad film. Like yeah. No, what you want is if you're making your bad movie, make it somewhere tropical and nice and somewhere you're getting good food and good views and in between kind of like when you have days off filming, you can just like be on the beach or something. That's what you want, like a kind of relaxing. I think that's why like a lot of people like jump on board with like the Adam Sandler films.
Yeah,
Adam Sandler, I've enjoyed some of his films. Sandman, he's obviously an icon in
right.
amongst millennials who grew up with Happy Gilmore and all that. But he's made a lot of terrible films as well. And I think like a lot of people sign up to his films because like they get paid well and they get to go somewhere nice, you
Yeah,
know. Often Hawaii, that seems
yeah.
to be the main one. But so they get, it's like, and like I think that I wouldn't care, if I was Adam Sandler's friend and he's like giving me roles in movies that gets me paid and gets me free trips to Hawaii. I don't think I would be. I don't think I have the moral fiber to be like, no, I know I'm just getting this role because I'm your friend, and I know I'm just getting your this free chip because I'm your friend. I don't know if I have the moral fiber to like turn it down and be
No.
like, I'll take the high ground. I'll not take the trip to Hawaii. I'll not take this $500,000 check that I'm getting for a week's work. Like
Exactly.
no,
Exactly.
I'd absolutely take the check and the free trip. I'm not gonna lie. I'm sorry.
Exactly.
I'm sorry if your audience now thinks less of me, but
Right.
that's what I'd do.
No, that's the hard part, right? That's the thing is that, yeah, when they're offering you, I mean, for me, it's like, I mean, with the Milwaukee here in the United States, where the baseball team, like a St. Louis or something like that, a city that just has a baseball team and nothing, nothing kind of bigger beyond that people would, feel like they need. Not to, Milwaukee. I've got our guest Jeanette. She's from Milwaukee, so I'm not trying to cast aspersions. I'm just saying like a small city in America that has
Yeah,
baseball. That would be enough for me. I don't even need Hawaii necessarily, or the Adriatic coast
yeah,
in Italy. It's like, just
yeah,
fly me out there to Detroit and I'll watch a baseball game. It's like that's
yeah,
it's like,
yeah, yeah. I like, yeah. I mean, you could like maybe like like you can maybe like hang out with like cool people or
yeah,
whatever. Like obviously I don't know a lot about baseball. I know
yeah.
that like uh I'll just I'll just double check. I'm pretty sure he plays for Milwaukee. I'm pretty sure. Does he play for Milwaukee? He does play for Milwaukee. Yes, you can hang out with Giannis Antetokounmpo.
Oh, Giannis, yes, yeah, yes. So
Giannis Antetokounmpo,
yes,
who like one of those classic immigration stories where Greece finally gave him citizenship after he became a massive NBA star.
right, right. And his brothers. I saw his team, the Milwaukee Bucks. They came here to to Philadelphia to play the last game of the year, and So, obviously the big thing with American sports that we get wrong that European sports gets right is the whole relegation promotion thing.
Ah,
The
yeah, yeah,
Milwaukee
yeah.
Bucks, instead of trying to fight to stay above the relegation, they actually wanted to have a worse record so they could get a higher
Mm.
draft pick. Because again,
Ah, yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
we don't let
Because
kids
like,
from
yeah,
college decide what schools they go to. They have to, or what teams they go to. They get
yeah,
chosen
yeah.
by
They
teams.
they they get drafted. And yes, I
Yeah.
know if you like yeah, yeah, if you end up like bottom of the conference, you get like number one pick in the
Right, you
draft or
get a better
whatnot.
pick.
Yeah.
So they came. So obviously Giannis didn't play. I did get pictures of him during the timeouts coming out onto the court and like talking to his teammates.
Ah, so you didn't see Giannis play, but you saw him.
I got to see it right. But his brothers, I
Nice.
saw his two brothers. So part of the thing is that the Bucks have catered to him to such a degree that they're letting his two brothers, who are not really NBA caliber players, play on the team with him. And so one of the things is he wants to get traded, and they're talking about teams he could get traded to, like for example, Boston is talking about wanting him. And the question is, if you trade for Giannis, do you have to take his brothers too and give them roster spots on
Oh,
the team? Because that's part of it. The other thing is, one of his teammates this past year said that he was always late for the team flight, that he would make the team flight wait like 2 hours for him. So yeah, so
oh,
yeah, it's what they talk about is that like because he came from Europe, and it's like
yeah.
kind of the divaism that's happened with a lot of basketball players in America. He's sort of adopted it, and he's sort of taking it on for himself.
Oh, I didn't know that because he always came across well in interviews and stuff like that. It seemed like fairly down to earth, like previously when I saw him interviewed. So like I didn't know that like yeah, that's a little bit disappointing because I'd always thought he seemed like a good, solid fella. Um,
He was.
yeah.
That yeah, it's sort of yeah, it's just and who knows, maybe this situation when he goes to a new team, maybe it'll change. Because part of it too is that a team like Milwaukee, they won a championship with him. They don't get a lot of opportunities to win championships. The other time they won was when Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was on their team before he went to the Lakers. They won like 50
Mm,
years before that. So to have an opportunity to win a championship, that's like yeah, they'll kind of let the player do anything if he's like that good, because, you know, fans want to go see him play. Like probably like from an economic standpoint, if he leaves the Bucks, depending on who they get back in a trade, it will probably cost like the downtown area millions of dollars in revenue from people just coming to the city to see games. And so I know Cleveland had that when LeBron left, when he went from Cleveland to Miami, and then he went back to Cleveland, then he went to
mm,
Los Angeles. They talked about like the economic value of having him in the city because with the NBA, it's all about the star players. Like people don't really go just to see a team play. Like me, I clean up on low price games when, like for example, Giannis is out. Like I think I paid $12 for my ticket because nobody wanted to see the Bucks if they weren't going to be able to see Giannis play. Um,
mm.
so I clean up on those games, but for the most part, people don't want to go see those. And so yeah, from an economic standpoint, if you don't have one of those big stars on your team, it can be really costly.
Yeah. But like, yeah. I guess like from a like, kind of ego diva point of view, like to some extent you wonder why you would want to be traded to like a bigger sports market. Because like
Yeah.
obviously if you're traded to like Boston or whatever, you're like one of several icons of like, the Boston sports area. Whereas if you're like Giannis in Milwaukee, you're like number one, man. You're like,
Right.
like there's not a lot of competition. No disrespect to Milwaukee, a city I don't know much about, but like, you know what I mean? Like in
Yeah, oh,
terms of
yeah,
like a
yeah.
kind of smaller market, like a kind of like you're the number one dude. Everything's revolves around you. Whereas you move to like a Boston, a New York, and LA, like you're competing with several others.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Because like they have a baseball team in Milwaukee, but the baseball team, because the financial aspects of baseball, they tend to cycle through players. They'll sort of
Mm,
build, because they have good teams. They always have good teams, but a lot of times their players move on to other teams after it's time for them to get paid, and then they bring up more young players and have those new young players
mm,
fill in for the before they get big paychecks. So
mm,
Giannis really is kind of an institution there as far as a player because the Brewers, the baseball team's never going to have a player. that's going to reach the level of Giannis. So that's a good point. I guess he wants to win a championship, and I guess even though he won one already, he wants to win another one, and so he wants to go on a team that he can compete with. I guess the Bucks they
Right.
don't feel like they're going to be competitive. So
Hmm. Yeah.
yeah,
Okay. Yeah, I kind of it kind of makes sense. Like I say, yeah, I have no big thoughts on baseball because it's not a game I know about.
yeah.
I briefly watched it in the kind of early 2000s at the height of the kind of like Barry Bonds, Mark
Oh
McGuire,
yes,
Sammy Sosa, Royd era
yes,
baseball, where baseball briefly became professional wrestling. So like,
yes.
so I kind of that's the area that I kind of briefly was aware of, but outside
Yeah.
of that, I know almost nothing about baseball.
Well, the other
Apologies,
thing,
Matt.
the other reason why Giannis might want to leave, coming back to our conversation about doing bad movies in good
Yep.
locations, one of the teams that's thinking about taking him is Miami, and so from a climate standpoint, Milwaukee is one of the coldest cities in America. I mean,
Hmm.
there's very harsh winters in Wisconsin, in one of the northern states, whereas Miami, you're talking about dips between 90 degrees and 70 degrees, Fahrenheit. So like, between like 38 and
Ah, yeah, yeah, yeah.
I don't know, 20
Maybe
28 or something. Yeah, it's like so
fair
that might
enough.
be another reason why might want to go. Especially compared to Greece, temperature in Greece. Miami's probably a little bit more comparable for him.
Ah, yeah. Oh, like yeah, and then if he goes to Miami, like maybe we can get like the decision too.
Mhm.
Like that would be because it's almost 20 years since the decision, which
I know.
which is weird that everybody like who has a vague awareness of American sports
Yeah.
just knows what the decision is.
Oh yeah.
Like
Yeah, people still use
um
that expression of I'm taking my talents to X, because he said I'm taking my talents to South Beach. People, still use that expression of taking my talents to X place or whatever. Yeah, so
yeah.
so even 20
Circling
years
back to the
later.
movie, wasn't that 2007? Was the decision 2007?
No, 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 it was a little later. So
Oh,
so it
it's a
was
little later.
2010. So what
2010,
happened was is in
yeah, yeah.
2010 his team was supposed to win the title, supposed to be win the championship. And my team that I root for, the Celtics, beat them in the
Oh,
playoffs
they
before they
did,
even
yeah.
got to the finals. And so his contract was up and he kind of felt like he couldn't win in Cleveland with his team.
Cleveland, yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah, so he went to Miami where other players were good, and the idea was that they were going to create a super team that would beat my team, the Celtics. And in
Yeah, that's right.
2011 they lost the finals, and then they won in 2012 and 2013. So they
Yeah.
did, they were successful. But that was yeah, so it was 2010, summer of 2010
It's
was the
20
decision.
summer 2010 was this. I was making it slightly earlier in my head, but I do remember it. I do remember the drama
Yeah.
around it. It was very entertaining. Like I don't think a press conference has ever been more hyped in the history of press
No.
conferences.
Yeah.
Yeah,
He has said that he wished he had that one back. But I mean,
yeah,
one of the
yeah.
interesting
I
things.
understand that. Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah. Well, because he wasn't even, I guess he was born in 83, I think. So I guess he would have been 27. So it's not like he was young at that time.
No, he
Yeah.
wasn't.
So I was going to say give him a pass because he was young, but no. But I mean, compared to other athletes with like all the stuff that they get into, it is interesting. Like that was like kind of maybe the worst thing he did. And it kind of, compared to like, getting into trouble with the law and things like that. I guess, he could say like that's, um, lower on the totem pole, but at the same point, it's so infamous that it's like
It's
he'll
yeah,
yeah.
it's so kind of iconic. But like yeah, I mean like and of course like like a classic kind of sports fan hypocrite, obviously for a long time since the 90s I have uh, casually followed the Lakers, and obviously my appreciation of LeBron went way up. When when he joined the Lakers, because all sports fans are deeply hypocritical people. People are like, no, I'm not that much of a fan until they come to your team, and you're like, yeah,
Right,
I was always a LeBron defender,
right, exactly. Yeah.
Like I never said anything bad about LeBron. You can't prove that through social media posts or anything. Like that's definitely not something
Right.
I ever did. I was always very pro. very, very pro. You know, love the man.
Right, exactly. Yeah, that's always a common thing in Boston sports radio is that people will call up complaining about certain players. And the radio show I listen to is called Felger Mass. The hosts like
Uh,
to troll Boston fans, and they'll be
yeah.
like, "No, you'd love that guy if he was on the Celtics or if he was on the Bruins or whatever the teams are. You know, if he played for our teams, you would love him, but you hate him because he's on this other team. You know." And they're like, "No, that's
Oh,
not
that's
true."
true.
Yeah,
That's true. Like like, and like we'll circle back real soon. We're mere minutes away from getting back to urban justice, but
right.
um, there is certain people that like you will like automatically defend
Yeah,
that you would not defend if they were on another team. Like for example, I'm a football fan. My main team is Hearts, who are a Scottish team. People might not be so aware of them, but my kind of second team is Manchester United, who much more global awareness. Um, and like I don't think I would like Roy Keane if he had played for another team. He's naturally annoying, but I love him deeply.
yeah, or Nemanja Vidic, right? Probably, yeah. Like,
Nemanja Vidic, yeah. There is certain ones who push the line too much. You know,
right,
like as much as I very much appreciate what he did for Manchester United, I
yes,
still deeply dislike Cristiano Ronaldo
right,
because like
yes,
there's some people who can just push it that little bit too far.
yeah.
That even break your kind of commitments to your team of just being like, yeah, but you are annoying to an extent that I can't deal with. Whereas like there is other people who like if Roy Keane had played for Arsenal in those years, I probably dislike Roy Keane, because he's just an annoying kind of like get under your skin type of troll type of player. But because he played for Manchester United in those glory years, I love Roy Keane.
Yes. Yeah, and I'll say quickly, going back to Arsenal, like I had to confront my own, be consistent with my own opinions on sports when the game against West Ham. One of my
Oh
rules
yeah.
about video replay is that if you can't see immediately that it was wrong, like if you've got to sit there and watch it for minutes on end,
Yeah.
then it shouldn't be overturned. The original
Yeah.
call should stand. And so I have to be consistent and say, yes, that probably should have been a goal. If it takes 6 minutes to determine that Raya was fouled, then then you shouldn't overturn it. And so now I don't know what that means for the championship. If that had gone as a draw, I guess they would be playing this weekend for the championship as opposed to it ending this past weekend.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah,
had to
yeah,
be
they
consistent,
would
you
be.
know?
Yeah, yeah, it
Yeah.
would be. And again, I mean, that's a classic example. I'm
Yeah.
sure if you supported another team, you'd probably find Mikel Arteta annoying, but I'm sure you probably love Mikel Arteta.
Yeah, so I get it with with him as well, and I think I don't know. It's one of the things I will say. I know we're kind of off on we're in EPL territory here, which I know everybody
Yeah,
was
yeah,
wondering
yeah.
if we were going to make it there. But and I compare like for example Sir Alex Ferguson or even Wenger in the earlier years. I think
Mhm,
Wenger
mhm,
didn't do a good job of adjusting when Chelsea became ascendant, whereas I
mhm,
think Ferguson did a better job of that. But one of the things that Ferguson and Wenger were good at was navigating the Christmas holiday period where there's just fixtures everywhere. And I don't think Arteta did a good job of that this year. And you saw like maybe they did okay like with the Boxing Day fixtures and kind of that, but then there's this lull where other than the Champions League games, and even the Champions League games, some of those they were like either eking out wins or they were playing teams that they were just so woefully undermatched that they were going to win those games. But you can kind of see they kind of lose out on two big tournaments, right? They lose out on the FA Cup and the Carabao Cup. And they go this period where they're getting a lot of draws and they're getting losses in there. And I think it's just they managed to weather it. They managed to, they won the championship. They had just enough extra, but bringing like Gyökeres and players like that. But again, it just seems like every year he's not good at getting the team to stay focused and through that period of a bunch of fixtures. And it just seemed to happen again this year.
mm. Yeah, yeah. I I guess like yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's hard to like um because like the football that Arsenal play is very defensive and it
Yeah.
involves a lot of focus and like maybe it's just hard to do that over like the whole season, and there's always
Yeah.
going to be a little bit of a is a little bit of a lull because like to the exact opposite because you're going to face Paris Saint-Germain
Yeah.
um 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 uh like in the Champions League final in the exact opposite vein, it seems like both in the league and the Champions League, like Paris Saint-Germain under Luis Enrique, who play this kind of high velocity, always attacking football, um, they seem to like there seems to be like a massive difference between them pre-Christmas, where they're kind of like, yeah, they're fine,
Yeah.
and post-Christmas, where they're like, oh my
Uh,
God, they seem unbeatable. You know, like it's just
yeah.
like it seems like they write off certain months of the year. It's like I kind of, you know, like like in that kind of like autumn period or whatever, or but like once we get post Christmas, once we get to January, we're just going to like hit the gas and we're just going
Yeah.
to come at you full throttle and we're going to, cut you to pieces with, Dembele and all the players,
Yeah.
like all the, great players we've got. So like, I don't know. I don't know how much of it's kind of inbuilt because with Enrique, it seems like it's inbuilt that he knows that they can only play, foot to the pedal, pedal to the metal football for so many months of the year, but they can't play it the whole time. So they basically write off the early months of the season and then, accelerate away post Christmas.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, the other thing too, I don't know Ligue 1's schedule to the extent that I know, like, Serie A and La Liga, where
Ah,
they have
yeah,
that
yeah,
big
yeah.
Christmas break. And I
They
remember,
do have they have a winter break. They have a winter break.
yeah,
Like most European leagues, Bundesliga, Ligue 1,
yeah,
La Liga, Serie A, they all
yeah,
have winter breaks.
yeah,
Like Premier League's one of the very few who doesn't. And also, there's a lot of controversies in France about how like PSG can kind of they have a lot of sway and they
yeah,
can kind of control their schedule a little bit. And they've had games cancelled before Champions League games and stuff like
yeah,
that. So there's a lot of controversy in France about how much power they have over the French league, over League One. So, but that's a whole other big kettle of fish that we should probably not get into, and we
no,
should
it's
probably circle back to urban
which
justice,
is
aka renegade justice, and finish our conversation
yes. Well,
there.
yeah, because I think you're absolutely right because there's a lot you could talk about with so because I'll say very quickly we used to have a friend who's from Naples. He lived here in Philadelphia. He passed away about I
Mm,
guess like almost 7 years ago now. But he was a Napoli fan, and we would watch games on Rai. So they'd be in Italian, but he would just watch highlights of the Juventus games and be like, "Oh, yep, there's a penalty that they got there," because it was almost like this idea of like we want Juventus to win the Champions League so bad that we're going to do
mm,
everything we can to make their regular season in Serie A as easy as possible. And that was
mm,
the perception of everybody else around, kind of similar to what you're talking about with PSG,
mm,
yeah, which again in England nobody's doing. I mean, I guess that the West Ham thing might be the closest to
mm.
that kind of thing happening for one of the big clubs
Yeah,
in
yeah,
England getting a call like that
yeah,
because usually you don't get any, um, yeah, the EPL does not say, "Oh, you're going to be in the Champions League next week." Well, here, we'll make the game as easy as possible for you, and yeah, it's yeah, there's never usually that kind of a mindset there.
true. And yes, before we do circle back to urban justice, you can't mention Napoli without me mentioning that Napoli won Serie A last season thanks to an overhead kick from Scottish man and former Manchester United player Scott McTominay, who has now
Yes.
become a cult icon in Napoli, and also a lot of the Italian immigrants who live in Scotland come from the south of Italy, come from Napoli. So
Yeah.
there's a big Italian immigrant population in Scotland, and so he's become massively iconic and for this overhead kick, and he also did another overhead kick for Scotland to qualify them for the World Cup. So you can find murals of Scott McTominay in Scotland and in Napoli. He is, and also funny thing about Scott McTominay. Scott McTominay pretty scruffy dresser before going to Napoli. Now he's like full 2 seconds in Italy and he's like Armani suit man, he's
Yeah.
like looking cool as, so yes, hats off. Like I couldn't resist talking a little
No.
bit about Scott McTominay and when you brought that up.
I wonder if Italy's going to be rooting for him or for Scotland or if
Well,
parts of
part
Italy.
of
Yeah.
Italy, parts of
Yeah.
Italy will definitely in Napoli in the south. I think they will be cheering us on.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Excellent. Yeah. No, no. Perfect. Well, yeah. So for everybody, yes, you're doing the Matt and Scott Seagal episode bingo card. We got the world football. We nailed that part as well. But
We got the football part in. Great.
exactly, yes. The thing is for people, and I guess I could just edit these parts out, but
Mm.
for Scott and I, we don't have a lot of people that we talk football with all the time, and so sometimes it's kind of like, especially for me in particular, I just, it's sort of like I scratch the itch while we're chatting when it comes up. So, well, well, as we're talking urban justice here, I guess anything that we missed on this, anything that we didn't cover.
I I'm just like, kind of having a wee look through my notes. No, there's not a whole lot we missed. Like, because we kind of gone over the basics of the plot, and we kind of talked about all the kind of major characters and incidents, and we kind of went through the kind of fight sequences. I would say that like uh one of the things that we've kind of talked about, particularly when it comes to Eddie Griffin, is like there is actually quite a lot of fun lines in this movie. Some of which we've talked about. I've not killed a bitch in a week. The kind of like all these little motherfuckers crunk dancing. His various Scarface quotes. Eddie, one of our man's other great lines is, "Man, fuck Santa Claus. He never gave me shit." And
Yes,
like
that's right.
which I
That's
thought
right.
I thought was cool. Um, and then like Isaiah has a weird line which I thought was funny when they were talking about, if like they get further up in our man's crew or whatever, they'll be, he'll have all the bread, bitches, and cocaine. Like that's
Right, right.
that's
Because I think, because then, right, because the buddy says, or I don't know if it's, whoever says the line, the other one's like, "You're
yeah.
doing too much of that cocaine," or something like that. Like you're doing too much of
Yeah,
that, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
Too much, too much, too much, too much coke. But that's what he's. Like instead of the classic line about like giving the populace bread in circuses, like that's
Okay.
instead it's bread, bitches, and cocaine. That's what the people want apparently. Um, um, yeah. Uh, yeah, so no, so that's something I noticed that like yeah, there's a lot of fun lines, but like mainly the fun lines are from our man,
Yeah.
and I don't know how much of that is like Eddie Griffin improv,
Yeah.
um, but like a lot of them are kind of like they're the best. But yeah, some other characters have some fun lines. But no, I just think like it's like it's a very basic straight ahead Revenger. There's not much more to it than that, but I think it's not a great movie. It's obviously you can see its budget constraints. There's the shonky green screen car chase, all that kind of stuff.
Yes.
But it's got some fun lines. It's got some fun performances. Eddie Griffin is by far the MVP of the movie. The yeah the fights are good. For the most part. You get like a little bit more committed Seagal that is more reminiscent of kind of his peak period in the kind of early 90s. And yeah, I think that's it mainly covered. Yeah.
Yeah, the only thing I wanted to mention quickly is I'm going back to the trivia. Um, is this our guy who does the fake trivia on Seagal? I don't know. Here's the one that I wasn't sure. It said director Don E. Fauntleroy agreed to direct the film under the terms that Seagal would stay on set until he was told he could leave. Um, Now, it seems like that's joke. Like it seems like that's, the same guy who talks about breakfast Ben and Jerry's or whatever, except that it's not
Mm.
as funny. It's not as out there as the breakfast
No,
Ben and
it's not as
Jerry's.
out there.
Yeah.
It's not like the whole the whole trivia bit. I don't know if because some of them get deleted, but like it's not like the whole trivia bit where like like on the keeper where like apparently like Seagal walked off set because he lost his big hat. The big cowboy hat he's wearing at the start of the movie. The wind blew it off and then he went in a sulk or whatever. Like there's like a whole story to that. Like which seems like ridiculous. And then there was the one that talks about the breakfast burrito and like his pal Vladdy P and like like well, all this kind of stuff. So like yeah, so normally the joke ones are a bit more like noticeably outrageous in their claims.
Right, right. I mean, this might actually because we found out that, Fauntleroy had trouble
Yeah.
getting the shooting in because Seagal had so many pages in this movie that he had to shoot, that it might be an exaggeration, but real, like closer to real. So
Mm.
I don't know if we ever had a joke one on this one and it got removed. I think it might be right that you might be right that they sometimes remove these, which who is going through Steven Seagal uh, IMDb trivia and reporting the joke ones? I'd like to know who that
I
person
can
is.
only
That's
imagine Steven
you think it could be
Seagal.
Seagal? It could be. You might be right. I never thought of it that way. That like
Steven Seagal is a man of that level of pettiness. I can only
yeah.
imagine.
Can you imagine?
That yeah, that he's
Who's this
like
guy?
scrolling through trivia and being like, "This is wrong."
Right, right. I never have Ben and Jerry's in the morning or whatever. I don't have breakfast Ben and
Right.
Jerry's. Yeah, right.
That's
Yeah,
true. That's true.
that
He'd
could
be
be.
talking to himself. He'd be talking to himself in his performative, threatening whisper that he does. It's like, "This is wrong. I
Right.
gotta get this removed."
Right. No, I'm going to report this. Yeah. Oh, I got to sign up for an account. Oh, what do you mean I got to sign up? Then he like calls his assistant and tells them to sign up for an account and report it. And yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
We need this IMDb trivia removed. Get it removed now. This offends the Seagal. Seagal probably talks about himself in the third person. I can only imagine. Like,
Exactly. Exactly.
this
Yeah.
Seagal
So
wants this removed now.
yeah. Yeah. So if anybody's listening, and you remember what the trivia might have been for this one, because I didn't mention it in my review. I did review this one.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know how long ago. It was a while back. So when I did review it, I don't think I mentioned the trivia at that point because I think that person had been doing them that far
Mm.
back. I think they've been doing like for 20 years or so now. So yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. Now the other thing I'll
That's
quickly say
commitment.
about this movie is it's on YouTube, but also it is it did get added to the Roku channel. So
Ah,
it
okay.
it seems to
I didn't
float
notice that.
around. So yeah, so
Mm.
April of 2008, April 22nd of 2008 is when I reviewed this one. This was another one that I think I was looking for. I was still looking for Out for a Kill. And so this was in
Mm.
that window of time where I was trying to find the movie where he throws a samurai sword from a second story window and decapitates a man, which it was Out for a Kill. I was pretty sure it wasn't Urban Justice, but I was still, going through every Seagal movie
Mm.
until I found it. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, Scott, as we're wrapping up, anything that you wanted to plug?
Well, yes. I have two podcasts. One is All 90s Action All the Time, a monthly podcast where we look at action films from the 90s. We cover the corresponding year of whatever year we're currently in. So we're currently covering action films from 1996. The By the time this is out, the May episode will be out. So the May episode will be Eraser. I've got that in the can. It will go up from the point of recording next week for me, but like a couple of weeks back for you listening to this. So yeah, that's a fun conversation where I have with an other podcaster, Adam Thornton from the Films That Time Forgot podcast. And then my other podcast is Bloody Sam, a Peck and Pa fan podcast. And that is a podcast. It was essentially a mini series where each month I'm covering one of the 14 feature films that Sam Peckinpah did. At the moment, I've got no plans to do beyond that, so I'm not covering the TV series The Westerner he did, and I'm not covering some of the TV movies he did, like Noon Wine. So just his 14 feature films. So we are kind of um we've there's like 5 episodes out. By the time this episode's aired, there will be 6 episodes out. The May episode being Straw Dogs, which is the only podcast episode where I've ever felt the requirement to add a trigger warning because there's a lot of discussion about that particularly infamous sexual assault sequence that happens in that movie. So like yes, I think I should I think I think I feel a responsibility to offer that trigger warning here also. So if you don't know what Straw Dogs is about, I mean obviously it's a very famous controversial film. So like if you have any awareness of Straw Dogs, you will be aware of the sequence I speak of. But yeah, that's the 2 podcasts that are currently I'm currently doing. Yes.
Excellent. Yeah, people should definitely check those out. I mean, I would already subscribe to them, but yeah, I think yeah, Straw Dogs, I think it like you said, it's it's interesting because like I've been doing these erotic thrillers with John. And we don't have to do a lot of trigger warnings with those. I mean,
Mm,
they verge on that territory where, you
mm-hmm,
see like an
mm-hmm,
assault
mm-hmm,
possibly happening, but either they
mm-hmm,
cut away and don't actually show it, or they actually cut away and leave it vague, and you find out that actually what you think happened didn't happen, which I think is still maybe
mm,
trigger warning necessary because it's still kind of bringing up the idea of it. Um,
mm-hmm.
but yeah, it's interesting. Those erotic thrillers don't always go there. Like,
Don't go there. Yeah.
yeah, I think the one,
Well, I mean, like, yeah, I felt like the need to give a trigger warning for that one because it's quite an extensive
yes, yeah,
assault sequence that happens in that movie. So, like,
yeah,
I think, yeah, people need to be aware of what they're getting involved with. I mean, I assume if they're listening to my podcast, they probably have an awareness of Peckinpah's films, probably have an awareness of that film. So, but if they didn't, like, I think,
yeah.
yeah, people need to
You
be aware
can't
of what they're
guarantee,
listening to.
you can't assume. I found, especially,
Yeah.
now that we've gotten so far. I mean, you're talking about movies from, they're talking about movies like Eraser from 1996 being 30 years old. So we've gotten so
Mm.
far from movies like Straw Dogs, which, Straw Dogs was a movie that used to be on TV all the time as I was a kid.
Mm-hmm.
And, yes, I mean, it would be edited to some extent, but you're still getting the
Mm.
gist of what's happening in it. I mean, there's no TV channels now that show movies like that. So
Yeah, yeah, that's very true. And also, as is highlighted on the Wikipedia page of Straw Dogs, um, uh, Straw Dogs came out in 1971, so 55 years ago. And in 1971, as well as Straw Dogs, 1971 also saw the release of Clockwork Orange, French Connection, and Dirty Harry, which does suggest something badly wrong was going in 1971.
right. Yes.
So that's it wasn't a good time.
Yeah.
It wasn't a good time. People were not having a good time in
No.
1971.
But interesting,
Um,
two of those movies, French Connection and Clockwork Orange, were part of AFI's 100 Years, 100 Movies. So,
Great movies. They're great
yeah,
movies. Very,
they were that
yeah,
high.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
But,
yeah.
yeah. Yeah.
Controversial, bleak movies, but like good movies. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I think yeah, Clockwork Orange is one of the few that made the movie list and the book list. So
Ah, yeah.
yeah, there's like 3 or 4 books that made both, or 3 or 4 books that had adaptations that also made the movie list. But that was one. Clockwork Orange was one. I was trying to think of others off the top of my head, but I don't want to keep the guests listening to me trying to figure out what was some of these other movies were. Grapes of Wrath is one that comes to mind. That was another one. That was,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, top 100 movie, top 100 book. So yeah, so
Mm-hmm.
there's some like that. Yeah, and if people were wondering, Portnoy's Complaint did not make both lists. It was just on the book list. So if we're going back to
Just
Philip Roth, call back to
right,
Philip Roth.
circling back to Philip Roth. Yeah, Bet you didn't expect that listening to your Seagal
Exactly,
episode.
exactly. I
Um,
know. Yeah. Is that going to be the next bastion of the bingo
that'd
card
be
for
the
us,
next.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
discussing literature figures that we're aware of. The arc of their careers. Yeah, I don't. I don't know. I don't know, like, because I used to be quite a big reader when I was in my 20s, but now I barely read at all now. But yes, the people that I'm aware of to keep, to keep the listeners going for a bit longer is like I was very into the Beat Generation. I was very into Hunter S. Thompson. I have an awareness of Philip Roth, and then there's a bunch of British writers, like Martin Amis that I've read a lot of. So I could talk. I could certainly talk about them. I could certainly
Yeah.
talk about them if William Burroughs or Martin Amis or Hunter S. Thompson or something other thing comes up, somebody else like that comes up, I can talk about them. But
Yeah.
J.G. Ballard, another one I know
Oh,
about.
yeah. Yes. Well, you mentioned Kerouac with the Beat Generation. Like, I'm
Yeah,
from
Kerouac.
Maine.
I've read a few Kerouacs. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I was big into Kerouac when I was teens, twenties. Yeah.
Yeah, he's a French Canadian. He grew up in Lowell, Massachusetts, about 45 minutes where I grew up. And it's funny because we always
Hmm.
talk about Stephen King. Oh, big Maine writer Stephen King, but actually Kerouac's closer to where I am from
Mm.
than Stephen King is. And he's also, same heritage as I am. He's a fellow French Canadian. So,
Oh,
yes, I feel like I should have more affinity towards him than Stephen King. Even though
yeah.
we,
Oh.
we think of Stephen King as Maine's own, because Maine doesn't have many of anything. It's a state that's
Hmm.
roughly 1.3 million people in the entire state, and so
Wow.
yeah, as you
Okay.
can imagine, not many of anything. John Ford, I guess, one of the greatest directors of all time, is from Maine, so I guess that's one
That's
thing.
true.
Yeah.
That's true.
So
And also, of course, Murder, She Wrote, one of the greatest television
exactly,
programs of all
yes.
time.
Yes. The murder capital of the world, where she was Cabot Cove was, yes, the murder capital of the world at that time. Yes, that's a good point. We
I
did
love
have.
there's an episode where one of the it's not the first sheriff in the show, it was like the second sheriff in the show. There's like an episode where he's like transferred from New York and has become the sheriff of Cabot Cove. And he mentions that like in an episode of being like, what is this is like, it's like this tiny little Maine town, and it has like at least like 70 murders a year, which is like for a town that's we're guessing is maybe of like 10, maybe 20,000, like maybe
Right,
less actually, maybe under that. It's probably only a
right,
few thousand given what you see, the kind of it's got like one main street and what you see.
right,
So maybe it's
exactly.
less, maybe it's under 10,000.
Oh, probably, yes, for
Like
sure.
it probably is under 10,000, maybe only a couple of thousand. And it's got like 70, 80 murders a year. Like
Exactly. I
you're
think
like
in
you're like
Maine,
that's pretty crazy. Yeah.
I don't know if there are 10 cities in Maine that have over 10,000 people. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay, so probably it's probably because Cabot Cove it looks like a small town, so I think it's
yeah,
maybe supposed to be only like a couple of like maybe like 2,000 or something like or
yeah,
maybe
exactly. It has this massive murder
I think
rate.
it's small.
Right.
It's a relatively small, and you only see a small part of the community. So the more I think about it, the more it could only be like a thousand or something. But yeah,
Yeah.
maybe it's a couple of thousand. Let's say it's maybe 2,000. But still, yes, it's got like 75 murders a year. Which is a town of that size would be outrageous.
Exactly.
Like if it had one murder a year, that would still be pretty strange
Yeah.
for a town of that size. But
Exactly. Exactly. I think they did take the show on the road towards the end. Like, I think she was in
yes,
Ireland for one.
yes, because
Yeah.
there's like an Irish connection. She has some Irish relatives,
Yeah.
and she goes to New York a bunch as
That's
well.
right. Yeah.
So like but like um, but yeah, it's a very dangerous profession being friends with Jessica Fletcher because you're guaranteed to either be murdered or framed for murder.
Yes.
And like, sure, Jessica Fletcher will eventually prove your innocence, but you've still been you still being in jail for a few weeks, like
Yeah, and I mean, Maine probably isn't as bad as other places to be incarcerated, but it's not
yeah,
fun. It's not like it's
yeah,
still the United States. You're
yeah,
still being
yeah,
held, and yeah,
yeah,
like it's not like
yeah,
the overcrowding you'd get in other parts of the world, but
yeah.
you're still dealing with being in jail, right? Losing your freedom for a period of time, or having to pay a lawyer, bail bonds person. Yeah, they don't talk about the fact that you're out like probably a good six figures while you're trying to proclaim your while Jessica Fletcher's out there trying to, prove your innocence. That yeah, that'd be kind of funny if they talk about that, like like, oh well, why are you living in this mobile home park here? Well, I had to sell my house to pay for my lawyer to deal with the criminal charges that I ended up being acquitted on. Oh, okay, all right, that's so
Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
but
yeah, 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 yeah,
yes,
yeah, yeah. Yeah. So that's something your listeners probably don't know about me. I have watched all 12 seasons of Murder, She Wrote growing up. So like,
I haven't watched the show in years, but so when I was a kid growing up, when they would have NFL football on Sundays,
mm,
the games would be on this channel CBS. And after
mm,
the games, they would have to show 60 Minutes, and then Murder, She Wrote would be on after that. And so
mm,
I just remember that always being on, especially if 60 Minutes wasn't so galling. Like sometimes as a kid, the
mm.
topics would be difficult to manage.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah,
but and then
sure.
usually too, we'd eat dinner after the late NFL game. So NFL, they'd have a
Mm.
1 p.m. game and a 4 p.m. game. The 4 p.m. game would end at 7 ish. We'd usually have dinner while 60 Minutes was on, so I could avoid it. But then Murder She Wrote, that was like yeah, that was my mom loved that show, so it was like always on. Yeah, we could do
Same, same, same. That's why I've seen every episode because like
exactly yes.
my
Yeah.
mom loved that show. So like she's a big fan of murder mysteries. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So yeah, maybe when we run out of Seagal movies, we can do the Murder She Wrote podcast. There we go. Yes. The Murder She Wrote
Do you know
episode.
what? I kind of love that. I would
Yeah.
kind of like I would like it was always shown on the BBC in the afternoon. So
Yeah.
because like I had like a lot of sickness when I was a kid. I had asthma, I had migraines, and so like one of the main memories of my childhood was being ill on the couch in the living room watching Murder She Wrote with my mum as like the ultimate comfort television. So like like if I stop doing my other podcasts at any stage, the and I think it's the kind of thing. Once I get older, I'll hit like 60, and then I'll start doing the Murder She Wrote podcast and go through
Yeah.
all 12 seasons. Plus, there's a bunch of TV movies they did as well.
You're
So like,
right. Well, because because I think they were like 22 episode seasons as well. So
yeah,
I
yeah,
mean,
they
there's like
were
a
they
good
were they were
250.
full. They were full. Yeah, they were full like 22
Yeah.
episode seasons. Like because it ran from the like mid 80s through it was like 84 to 96 or something like that. So
Right.
like it's like yeah, it's that era of television where it's like of American television where it's all
Yeah.
like that length of season. So yes, so there's a fuck ton of episodes.
Exactly. Yeah. A lot of murders. We're talking about like hundreds of murders. It's like it's yeah. So I guess yeah, but we've got something to shoot for people listening. Keep listening to this podcast, and eventually it will be the Murder She Wrote podcast. And yes, and Scott and I will be going through all 300 episodes or whatever it is of Murder She Wrote, and yes, breaking them down. Yeah, I'm sure there's plenty of tropes in those. I don't know that they're quite the Seagal tropes, but I'm sure there's quite a Murder She Wrote bingo card as well.
Oh, there absolutely is. The
Yeah,
number one on the bingo card is if you are a friend of Jessica Fletcher,
right.
you will be murdered or you will be framed for murder.
Exactly, exactly. You're right. So that's like the category, right? The two categories, the murdered or the framed for murdered categories. But yeah, and that was always amazing too, because like they would, I know we're kind of on a Murder She Wrote tangent as we're wrapping up the episode, but
Yeah,
just the way that like that person it was like this great reunion, like the friend would be
yeah,
like there and it's like, oh, it's so great to see you again, all this stuff, and then the next day the sheriff is showing up and they're out having coffee or something and the sheriff comes and arrests her and it's like,
yeah.
what do you mean you killed? No, I didn't kill, it's yeah. um
It's
yeah
amazing. So I've just quickly looked up. This is how we can end the
yeah.
episode. There is 264 episodes of Murder She Wrote plus four TV movies.
Wow. Yeah, so that is a lot of content and that's just yeah, I mean, so because they say that podcasts don't usually make it past like I think it's like they said past 20 episodes or
50.
50, yeah.
Oh no, yeah, 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 yeah. For you to be considered like it's one of those kind of like benchmarks. Like most restaurants close within 6 months. Like
Yeah.
most podcasts finish within 50 episodes.
Yeah. So you'd know with a Murder She Wrote one, if you committed to it, that you were gonna, you know, you're gonna surpass that by quite a, but 5 times, I guess. Yeah.
Quite a
Yeah.
bit. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. Perfect. Well, we'll leave it on that note. Thank you again for coming on, Scott. This was a ton of fun.
Yes. Thanks, man.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for listening. We'll be back soon. Bye, everyone.